Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. We have a lot of people in the room, so if I can start on this end and just go around and introduce yourselves, that would be great.
Sorry, I can't say it. Like, is this end?
This end, yes.
Okay, I'm Tina Smith, work with the Utah Charter School Association.
Rebecca Cisneros, State Charter School Board.
Jennifer Lambert, Executive Director for the State Charter School Board.
Michael Jones, Teacher Life Center at Western Governors University.
James Kaczynski, Western Governors University.
Peter Chamberlain, Board of Trustees, Lakeview Academy.
Lorraine Nelson, Lakeview Academy.
Rick VC, Director at Lakeview Academy.
Kevin John, USB Internal Audit.
Marilee Coles Ritchie, Teacher Educator.
Christy Jones, Teacher Educator.
Brandon Fairbanks, just here to support LEAP Academy.
Kim Dorr, here to support LEAP.
Stephanie Spiker, and I'm here to represent LEAP Academy.
Drew Camps, USB Intern.
Jeannie, what's my name? Jeannie Rowland, USBE, and Coordinator for Educator Effectiveness.
Tracy Watson, Utah Education Association. Carol Lassiter, Associate Superintendent of Blind, USDB, Utah Schools for the Deaf and Blind.
Joel Coleman, Superintendent for USDB.
Travis Rawlings, Educator Licensing Coordinator for the Utah State Board of Education.
Awesome, thank you.
People talking.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we're going to start with the first item on the agenda. Oh, yeah, let's introduce ourselves around the table.
Sybil Child, USBE Support Staff.
Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices for the Board.
Lisa Cummins, District 11.
Tara Warner, District 1.
Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent and staff to the Law and Licensing Committee.
Michelle Bolter, District 15.
Brittany Cummins, District 6.
Laura Belknap, and nobody cares what district. I'm in District 5, however. Which is not next to District 6.
Okay, so we'll start with the first item, 2.1, new charter school applications. So let's see, we have...
Do you want Jennifer and Rebecca to give a report?
Yeah, let's have Jennifer and Rebecca come up.
So I'm still Jennifer Lambert, Director for the State Charter School Board. We have two applications that the State Charter School Board approved last month. One is for a new school, it is LEAP Academy, and the other is for a satellite of Lakeview Academy. The State Charter School Board actually went through a pretty rigorous process. For the new applications, they heard 8 proposals originally. They moved on, they invited 3 to submit a full application, and from that they have approved 1. And so it was a pretty rigorous process. You'll see that LEAP Academy is a pretty strong applicant. They were the strongest of the 8 and have been moved forward. Lakeview Academy, we had 3 satellite requests, and of that 3, Lakeview was chosen to continue forward to open a satellite. And Rebecca is going to describe each one a little bit in more detail.
So as you saw in your backup, we, being a new school, we don't have a lot of data to present other than perspective, but what they presented was appropriate and gave great confidence in the board's capacity to execute the mission they presented. They are asking for a K-9 charter school, however they're doing that in a growth model, so they would start in a K through 7 with 648 students. That would eventually go through K through 9 with 810 students. That would be in West Kaysville, which is having a significant amount of growth. And one thing that I've appreciated about this board is they have reached out to Davis District and have tried to already create great relationships, join the Davis Education Network, and try to build those strong relationships with the district even prior to approval to make sure that that relationship is strong from the get-go. Their platform is basically a coaching model, and to take what we know about best practices in coaching and apply it to the school-wide culture, from how they interact with their teachers and students and peers, and just how it integrates the entire network to use this idea of coaching and students being self-motivated and self-driven. A lot of the ways that we would think about, not that the school would be founded on sports, but a lot of the mentality that we have around sports about students willingly listening to their coach and going that extra mile because they have that personal satisfaction and trying to take that same idea and translate it into academics. The second one is Lakeview. Lakeview's been around for a number of years.
Yes.
Can we keep them separate? And
Yeah,
ask questions separately?
I think that would actually be really good.
Thank you, Chair.
We do have someone here from LEAP if you have specific questions.
Okay. Which one? You guys are right.
Can I
If you would like to.
just want to ask some questions? Go for it. This actually is for you and not for LEAP. Sorry.
Oh,
is that
okay.
okay, Chair?
Yes.
All right. This is in West Kaysville, and I know there's a couple of charters there, and I know that that's not the reason you accept a charter or you don't. But what are the grades that the charters serve that are in West Kaysville? What are they serving now? And what is different with LEAP and the other two charters? I know they've reached out to Davis District, but I'm interested.
So the main difference is their model. They're bringing a different model. The other charter schools in the area are elementary schools.
Both are elementaries?
The closest is Jefferson, which is a K through 6 core knowledge school. And then LEAP would be a K through 9 coaching model. And they're the two that would be closest in proximity.
Is LEAP farther west, or is
LEAP
it
would be
northwest?
further west and south, I believe, if I'm
South,
reading
so
the map correctly.
more over by the arena, the horse arena. Okay.
Between the
When they come
highway-
to us, they of course do not have a specific location
But that's
actually
kind of-
identified, but
Okay, and so when you say they're doing, sorry, Chair. When you say that they're doing a leadership model, well, what model is that? Is it LEAP itself? Is that a group that has created a leadership model?
No, LEAD stands for Lead, Educate, Achieve, Perform. So that's their name
Acronym,
of their
okay.
school. They reference a lot of a man named Bob Shannon, and we've looked up his research, and he does a lot of professional development nationally for educators about implementing the coaching model. And then they've looked at some corporate models for the coaching and are trying to identify what, in relation to Bob Shannon's model, and then their board's vision and mission would be the most appropriate model. There's about 3 or 4 that they've looked at that they could bring in to really solidify that idea of those 6 coaching techniques.
Any other questions from board members? Okay, we'll go ahead then and move to the public comment. If you have anything more to add?
Do not, thank you.
Okay. So do I have a motion?
Yeah. I'll make a motion that we approve LEAP Academy to the full board with a favorable recommendation.
Okay, so the motion before us is to approve LEAP Academy and present it to the board with a favorable recommendation. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion
Can I do a
passed
follow-up
unanimously.
question? I know it's behind the 8 ball. I thought we'd have questions in there.
Oh.
Just before we word it. Are they using a management system, a management company?
they have indicated that they may, but they have not contracted with anyone.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move now to Lakeview.
So Lakeview's actually been around, I think this is their 13th year. It's kind of like with age, once you get to a certain point, you start counting. They've been very successful, especially in parent interest. They regularly maintain between 700 and 900 students on their wait list. Verified, not kind of this fictional long wait list because they're on 15 charter schools. They actually have a very strong interest in that community. Saratoga Springs is where they're located, and that community has been very favorable to them. And so as a result, they would like to, they're just kind of at the point where they can no longer expand on the land that they own. They can no longer expand the building in which they have. They've actually already gone through facility expansions in order to accommodate the interest. So they're asking for a K through 6 satellite school that would house 700 students. It would be in relative proximity to their existing campus as well. And so they would actually be very close sister schools feeding into their same common junior high. And in order to help facilitate with school-based reporting, it was a decision to have them be a satellite campus as opposed to an expansion. And so that's why they're before you today. They have phenomenal retention and transfer rates, and they've maintained those over the years that they've been open. And our board felt like their board has shown definitely capacity to replicate their success at a sister campus.
Any questions? Lisa?
So it says here that the potential growth is up to 1,700 students.
That would be LEA combined. So what they would like to do is be able to have that enrollment as an LEA split between the two schools as appropriate. But the satellite campus would be capped at 700 students.
So it's not going to grow, Chair, if I may continue, it's not going to grow on every school year.
You will not have a single school reaching 1,700. Both schools together will reach that number.
Okay.
And their existing campus right now is slightly over the 1,000 students and at full capacity. So there'd be no way they could bring other students.
Oh,
in
I
there
see
anyways.
it. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Board Member Belknap.
Thanks. This might have to be for the Lakeview people, but are they going to remain with one board overseeing both? And are they going to end up having two directors, or is the director going to bounce, or the principal? I'm not sure what term they use for their lead in their school.
That would be perfect for them, but what typically happens is one executive director over the entire LEA and then site-specific principals as is required.
Is that what the plan is? Thank you.
And just to clarify, anytime you have a satellite, it is going to be the same board over both schools.
I figured it would. Just checking, because there has been one, not in
But
our
they were
state.
two different LEAs, so that would be a
It
new
must have
school.
been our state with someone else. So.
Okay, any other board member questions? Okay, we'll move to public comment. Let's see, I have Laurie.
It's Laurie, but I
Laurie.
really don't have anything to add unless you have questions. We're happy to answer them.
And then Richard, right?
Yes.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for? Okay, so.
I'll make a motion that we approve Lakeview Academy's expansion and move it forward to the full board with a positive recommendation.
Okay, the motion before us is to accept Lakeview Academy's expansion and move it to the board with a favorable recommendation. Any discussion to the motion? Board Member Brittany Cummins.
So is this an expansion or a replication, and do we have to use the proper word?
It's a satellite.
It's a
It's
satellite.
a satellite. Okay, so I'll change the word to satellite in my motion.
So, any other comments to the motion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously.
Can I bring something else up?
Is this on charters? Because I have some questions too.
Okay.
So-
Okay.
I'll go with
I'm going to share a concern, and I'm not sure where to go with it other than here, and then maybe to the removing barriers task force. So I was on the state charter school board as a representative for a couple of years, and then I wasn't on it this last year. But I had the privilege of sitting and reviewing applications one time, and it is an extremely time-consuming process. And first, I'd like to thank the staff. They've done a phenomenal job, along with the state charter school board. There were a bunch of denials, but it's a long process. It takes more than a year, I would say, to begin and get through this. And there is an extensive amount of reading, and there's an extensive amount of discussion. They have to come in. And so I've been put back on the state charter school board as a representative, and I can vote the first round, but not the second round, which is fine. But I went this last, a couple weeks ago, and I'm really troubled by something, and I'm just going to bring it up. In this process, there were a couple of applications, and there was a great deal of debate and a great deal of discussion that went for quite a long time about both applications. And it was really tough. The votes were really, really close. And with the expansion as well, there was some great discussion about it. Interestingly, I would have voted to expand another one as well, or replicate, or whatever you want to call it. I would have voted, and I did in the first round support, but I was only one of like two. But here's my concern, and I don't know how to get around this concern. How do we here make a decision without, the vote was really close. There was a great deal of discussion on Leap Academy, and I feel, even though I was really hesitant to support that application, I wasn't involved in the whole long discussion, and so I supported the state charter school board's decision. But it concerns me that we're making decisions, which is a barrier in some ways, about applications and expansions without being involved in that entire process. And it really, this month was the one that really troubled me about that, because I think we have a great staff and they do so much work, and yet we come in without, we could say yay or nay. And that troubles me. So anyhow, I just thought I'd share that, and I'm going to bring it up to the Eliminating Barriers Task Force because I'm bothered by that. So, because truly, the arguments in support of Leap Academy there that day, I got those arguments in support of it. I also got the arguments against it, and that troubles me that we here, without having full knowledge of the whole discussion, make a decision. And the same thing with Lakeview Academy, and the one that I really wanted to support as well. So anyhow, I just thought I'd throw that out there. I'm not sure where to go with that, but we have a lot of people. Special ed looks at it, the attorneys look at it, the state charter school board staff looks at these applications. It is an extremely intense process, and yet we make a decision here. So I'm troubled. I don't know where I'm going to go with it, but I'm going to go to the Eliminating Task Force Barriers. Okay, Brittany?
Sounds like a big project.
Yeah. That'll be on the big lift, huh? Okay, thanks.
Be a heavy lift.
And just thank you and the State Charter School Board for doing a phenomenal job.
Well, thank you, and I really appreciate your comment. It's something that we've struggled with in how to get you the information. A lot of times when we come to this committee, you're asking for, well, we wish we knew this, or we wish we knew this, and each time we're trying to give you what you need, but it's really hard for you to duplicate in like 15 minutes what the State Charter School Board has spent,
a year
hours and a year, a much longer time doing. I wonder if, like, right now, what you did is you voted to sustain the process.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's how you can see your vote. That if you see the process as you saw it, that we did go through this long process, and you saw the tip of the iceberg. There was a lot that was behind that as well. Maybe that can give you confidence, but we're always also able to answer questions to help you understand. We want to help you understand and to know, but it's a good question.
And that's what I did. I decided to support the process. I don't know, other than being there. I think the information we get is fine, but the whole process, knowing exactly, it's like the curriculum. What are they using? Well, that's spelled out in the application, and then the presentations that they get. I don't know, what is it? 20, 30, 25 minutes?
In past years, that was the case. This year, we actually spent a couple of hours with each one.
Well, yeah, it seemed like that's what we were doing, but I remember somebody was holding up time, so maybe that was just the question and answer.
No,
period.
but it was scheduled time, 90 minutes, I think.
Yeah, so it's a pretty
Oh,
long, in-depth process, and so that's where I go. Is I'm wondering about supporting the process instead of reviewing an application and going, well, wait a minute. So I just think it's a very. I hope our board members understand this is a really long, intense process.
Well, one thing that we've wondered if there's an opportunity for us to present on what the process is to help others understand what that process is, and if there's any questions or concerns about the process.
I'm writing that down for a study session.
I think that's a great idea. Okay. Board Member Bennett, did you have anything else to add?
No, I did, but
It's covered? Okay. Okay, we'll move on now to 2.2. These are
what a way to clear the room.
Some more air to breathe in
Maybe next year. They need another year.
Okay. R277-502 Educator Licensing Revisions Amendment, and then R277-501 Educator Licenser. And we'll have Travis and Diana come to.
And today Travis is going to do all the talking.
So, if you'll, with your permission, Madam Chair, I want to give a brief overview of what is in the board docs, and then kind of go of what our recommended course of action would be, and then answer any questions that you have. And if you'd like me to go through the rule in more detail, I can certainly do that as well. So the first thing to know is, as is stated in the board docs, we sent out an initial draft of 502 and 501 on January 10th to both board members and a number of stakeholders, and collected feedback from those stakeholders. And essentially the idea is that the 502 revisions are intended to go into effect immediately, as soon as possible. Those are modifications to the licensing rule that the licensing task force felt was something that could happen within the current structure. The 501 rule is the delayed implementation of the full 3-tier licensing design that the licensing task force had recommended and that the board approved. And so that's what the two rules are. That's why there's two. There's one that will kind of make some immediate changes and then delay some changes. The 502 does 3 things primarily. The first is it changes the University Education Preparation Program entrance requirements, which have been a concern for some time for the board. 2, it changes some of the rules regarding out-of-state licenses, people coming from other states and their testing requirements and things of that nature. And the last is it directs the superintendent to work with stakeholders, both universities, districts, LEAs, to establish standards for pedagogical performance assessments. And the reason that goes into effect immediately is to give time for the standards to be established, and then anyone who wishes to design such an assessment would have more time to design that assessment and go from there. So that's the first rule. The second rule really is a lot of the details regarding the 3-tier licensing design, has specific details regarding, LEA specific. How does it happen? How long can it last? How does it work? There are a lot of different. I could probably spend 3 hours going through this with you. But what I thought I would do is go through the feedback document that I created. So we got feedback from a number of stakeholders, and I created a feedback document. I tried to color code it for you so you could see things that people liked, people didn't like, those kind of issues. And if I don't touch on something you want to know, let me know. First of all, overwhelmingly, the changes in 502 regarding the university preparation program and the out-of-state licensing changes were just overwhelmingly supported by, no exception. Everyone loved those. They thought it really made things simpler but still holding people to a standard. They really liked those. The implementation timeline was the one thing that pretty much there was pretty consistent. We're really worried about this. We're really worried about this implementation timeline with what's going on. And so what staff did is, after careful review and consulting with board leadership and the superintendency, we recommended and put in the final draft to delay that implementation for 1 year to January 1, 2020. And we pushed back the standards requirement for 6 months. The reason we did less is so that there'd be more time in between the two. But so that was the first change that we made based on the stakeholder feedback. The next one was we were using language in the rule regarding micro-credentialing, and I did my best to try to distinguish between an endorsement and a micro-credential, but it's very obvious from the feedback that the definitions were not clear. And so we just took that response and said, look, we're using the word micro-credential. We don't know exactly what it means. It's something we're really interested in. We want to explore it for renewal, for professional learning, but let's just take it out of this rule because we don't want to tie our hands later. So we removed the reference to micro-credential. For those of you that are familiar with the rule, instead of saying a micro-credential in the various topics, it says a professional learning module, whatever that means. But that's what we changed it to. The next one on this feedback that I think is very important is the removal of the school social worker and communication disorders license areas. That was mixed, but at the same time, based on the substitute House Bill 46 that you saw yesterday, it's likely that this should probably be changed. Those lines that were removing social worker and communication disorders should be put back in based on that. Otherwise, we would be eliminating them being able to get that money through that educator salary adjustment.
Representative Potter's bill?
No, Peterson's, the Peterson bill that Angie presented yesterday. Couple other, the other one that was the removal of the level 3 license. For those of you that aren't familiar, the level 3 license is currently available to people who have a doctorate level degree or who have ASHA certification, which is a national certification for speech-language pathologists, or national board certification. And, you know, there's about, to be honest with you, there's about 250 of them in the state that have national board certification. And then you add on the doctorates. There's probably, let's just say it's a small percentage of educators. But at the same time, there was concern that not having a level 3 would remove this special recognition of these other things. And ultimately, you know, staff struggled with this a little bit, and we thought about, tried to think about a couple other ideas, but we didn't come up with any good ones. But we really do believe that having some kind of incentive encourages people to do these things, but licensing may not be the appropriate avenue to do that. So, you know, the teacher salary supplement pays bonuses for national board certification. It can reimburse the cost of getting national board certification. And maybe that's where the incentive needs to be for those things rather than in the licensing aspect. But that was just staff's opinion, so however you'd like to proceed. The LEA-specific license was very interesting. It was, you know, it was mixed. That's why it's yellow here. There's really this kind of a camp that said, you know, we really like this flexibility. We really like being able to make these hard decisions when necessary. But at the other hand, there was this real concern about abuse, about the concern that does this just become the norm? Because the licensing task force always talked about that LEA specifics are intended to meet the exceptions. They're not intended to be the normal path to licensing. It's supposed to be the exceptions, those unique, you know, those special, you know, Bill Gates wants to teach a computer class, you know, type of thing. You know, we've talked about that before. Some people were concerned about it, like being in a public meeting, but we haven't really dictated how these would be reviewed by their local board. And most superintendents, most charter directors that have contacted me have said they'll probably put it on a consent calendar like the state board does with letters of authorization. It would be a similar process for them. But they would do it locally rather than use a state board. The next one, though, I'm sorry.
Can you explain what you meant by witch hunt or public shaming? I'm not sure I understand what that means.
It was kind of weird. So there was a couple individuals that were expressing the concern that if you were somehow singling out this person by having to approve it in a public board meeting. Like they were envisioning it as, you know, you're talking about this person and their qualifications, you know, extensively in a public board meeting. And so they said, well, we don't want to single out those teachers. We don't want to publicly shame them because they're not traditional or whatever that means. But ultimately, I think that boils down to how the local board does it. And, you know, we just felt it's more important for parents to have that notification, to have that opportunity to weigh in to the local board, to outweigh any kind of concern in that area.
Yeah, but would they not do it in a closed session and then present the name publicly?
Most likely, yes. Okay. Most likely.
Yes, yeah.
I think that what Travis was explaining before, though, is oftentimes like in a district, and I don't know, I've never actually been to a charter school governing board meeting, but you could, I mean, there's so many, they probably all vary in how they run them. But I do know that oftentimes when you come to licensing issues, it does generally end up on a consent calendar for those very reasons, so that you don't publicly talk about a person. But there is an exception to the Open and Public Meetings Act if they did see, you know, let's say that they had the three of us on there and they had concerns about Angie because whatever, she's an attorney and who wants an attorney in the classroom, right? But then they could go into closed session and say, well, we like Laura Belknap and Brittany Cummins, you know, LEA specific, but we're concerned about Angie for these reasons. Then they could pull that off of the consent calendar. But I guess the question is, how do they handle it? Do they redact the names? Or, you know, assign them some sort of a number, you know, and they'll have to handle that situation. That's probably what people are talking about because they're thinking it's going to be agenda item Laura Belknap and then agenda item Brittany Cummins and
as I've had discussions with superintendents and most superintendents talking to each other, they really have advised each other to do it in a basically just like the state board is doing it. That is that you have the name, you have a blurb, and it's on the consent calendar. That's what's on your letters of authorizations every month. That they probably just do something very similar.
Yes, Board Member Belknap.
How do they do LEA specific now?
So right now, they have to submit an application. It has to be signed by this.
I'm talking about the outward appearance that we're talking about.
I have no idea.
Okay, well, I've never. Ben, do you know?
When we were meeting with the superintendents on yesterday, at least one of them said they already put all their hires on a consent calendar, and they would just put a little side note that this is a LEA-specific license on their consent calendar. So I think there's probably a lot that already do it this way.
Because they're already doing this.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, the next part about LEA specific was brought up by a number of different individuals, and that is, again, that concern about abuse, but particularly with special education populations. And so based on that feedback, what we did was we put into the rule a caveat that an LEA specific license area in special education could not be renewed. Now, whether or not you want to keep that in there, that's up to you. But ultimately, it was to address the concern about abuse for a particularly vulnerable population. But that's up to you.
And Travis preschool as well.
Preschool? Well, just special ed in general. Preschool, special ed, or special ed.
Okay, Board Member Belknap.
I'm going to try and keep my face down. What do you mean by abuse?
What do I mean by abuse?
Yeah.
The concern, well, the way they've expressed it is that people,
Who are they?
The individuals that gave feedback.
Okay, all right. I just want clarity on that.
Okay, the individuals that gave feedback are indicating that it is possible for a charter school or a district to use LEA specific in ways that they believe that they should not. That's what they mean by abuse. That they believe that if you are putting someone into special education who does not know how to handle an IEP, does not know how to do the appropriate testing, does not know how to, the legal ramifications of IEPs, that is an abuse because that's the LEA saying this person can do this when in reality they can't. That's what they mean by abuse.
Yes, Board Member Belknap.
So we're making the assumption that these people that they're hiring right now today who are LEA specific don't know what they're doing. That would be the assumption. Well, it would be. And those who are in special ed right now, they don't know what they're doing, so we're going to tell them you can only do this 1 year. In my mind, that is not my call. That is on a local level to say we will train this person, we will make this person effective, we will help them get there.
And so what would prevent them, I mean, this is them talking, this is not me, but their argument would be, because I've had this argument with them, that then that person should move to associate and then to a professional license. If they can meet the standards, if they can meet the requirements, why shouldn't they be expected to meet the same requirements? That's what they would say.
Hold on, Board Member Warner wanted to talk for just a second.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
Robert's rules. We're supposed to.
Okay. On
it's a follow up to what he said. So.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. On reciprocity, two things. One, this covers the Hill Air Force Base people.
Yes, it does.
At the end, it seems like. And two, will that reciprocity go into effect soon?
It would go into effect as soon as the board rule has passed second reading. Yeah. If we don't anticipate any public comment, we could start implementing it at that point.
So reciprocity, okay.
So it could be because you'd adopt it on
because they'll do transfers in April.
Right.
Yeah, second and final in March, we'd file it. You'd have the 30-day public comment in April, so it could take effect as early as, I think, April 15th or April 20-something.
And we would be preparing for it to take
effect. Right, May 20-something, not April.
Okay. Board Member Belknap.
Sorry. You literally pointed to the table and you said, but I talked to them. Who did you talk to?
Okay, teachers. If you're asking me to express individual names.
No, I don't need names.
So this is an association. This is teachers.
I don't want to.
This is principals. These are HR personnel. These are charter directors that are concerned about the abuse by other LEAs. Essentially, it's never themselves.
So they don't trust other LEAs.
Yeah. Right.
So what you're saying, that we have no trust level for people who run a district or a charter.
I would say that the people that were giving that feedback have concerns about that, yes.
All right.
Anybody else have a question regarding this issue?
Maybe not a question, but a comment. It's amazing how much distrust we have, even at the local LEAs, towards each other. And maybe that's something else we need to look at. But wow. Okay, so they want oversight rules from the state level to impede upon other individuals. Where I'm hearing is there's a lot of fear, and that is the wrong way to implement policy, because fear impedes on liberties, and it impedes on learning and adjusting and making correction where it needs to be instead of a blanket oversight. I don't think that would be wise.
Okay, so I got the reciprocity out of the way. Okay, expired licenses. So I can't remember what we talked about because that was a week ago and I'm old. But we talked about we talked about the expired licenses if they've had a license.
Mm-hmm.
What did we decide?
It's still in there.
Okay, good.
Because that's current practice, and then we would need to a future rule would address how to do renewal under the new system.
Renewal's not in here.
Yeah, renewal's not in. Except in the current 502, there is a provision for what's called returning educator relicensing, which is a way for a person to renew their license. It would remain in effect right now.
But didn't we look at one that had some changes to expired licenses? I must be really old then, because I could swear we talked about it.
So we talked about putting some of those provisions into an associate license.
Okay, yeah.
Like making them have, that's part of the language in there that talks about, what an LEA has to do. And, having that plan established and having an observation in the first 30 days and those kind of issues with an associate license.
Okay.
Okay, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
So 502 might have it, but 501, is 501 supposed to replace 502 eventually?
It will eventually.
Because there's nothing about renewals in 501.
Correct. So the majority of renewal information right now is housed in 500. And so the goal is that when this goes into effect, we would have taken that relicensure program and all the renewal stuff and revised it, but moved it essentially.
And there's nothing in 501 about return to licensing?
There is not.
So is the assumption that to return to licensing you'd go through the associate?
No, the assumption is that we're going to move that section of code to a rule that just deals with renewal.
And then, were you finished with all these?
The one more is towards the end, and this is always the big one, is the Pedagogical Performance Assessment. It remains to be mixed. There are some that see it as a way of evening the playing field. There are some that see it as too hoop-like, I guess. There's concerns about which assessment to be used, those kinds of issues, the cost involved. But ultimately, as staff has really looked at this closely, it really boils down to the fact that you have to have a legally defensible, valid, and reliable way to move from an associate license to a professional license. If you do not have that, then we're back to where we are now, and that is that we're just taking people's word for it, whoever says.
Do we not have a pedagogical?
We have a pedagogical assessment as part of the I program, but it is it's kind of like a pedagogical knowledge assessment. A performance assessment is a little different. It's where you're actually showing you can teach. You're showing that you can implement proper pedagogical aspects, essentially.
Board Member Lisa Cummins.
So I had a phone call, and Diana, I don't know if she called you, I phoned in her direction, where she's in finance, she teaches finance, her degree, master's degree, is in finance, but she has no way to transfer that into a professional license, a pathway from what you're speaking, because she has an associate's degree to teach. Tell me if I'm on the same.
I'm not
I
following.
agree, Miko.
She did not-
I think what you're saying
but-
is that she has a certificate, a CTE certificate. Okay.
Right. So my question then goes to your description. Is the pathway subject related? Is it blanket? Is it a blanket overall education?
So of the existing pedagogical performance assessments,
Yes.
there are some that are subject specific
Okay.
that exist. There are some that are not. They're just general pedagogy. They both exist.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? I do have a question. So with those concerns with that assessment, what I see here that what was it that staff suggested
So what
we do?
and again, it's that staff believes that that's the linchpin, that to making this associate professional, that even this, all licensing has to meet the same standard, that this is the linchpin to that idea. If you don't have it, then all of a sudden you're back into different paths and different standards. And ultimately, that's why the staff is recommending that we adopt standards for such an assessment. So that if I'm a university, if I'm an LEA, and I want to move people to professional licensing, I can look at what's available. Do I want to spend the resources to create something that meets these standards? They won't be pigeonholed into a single assessment, but they would be able to choose or create as they saw fit.
Based on the standards.
Based on the standards, yes.
Yes.
Do we not currently have standards, is what I'm understanding? And what standards would we go to? Or
So, I've done a little bit of research into this. There are a couple other states that have standards for performance assessments. California is one that I've shared with the board before. But ultimately, it talks about, the standards that I've read talk about, the validity and reliability studies, the research that must be established around the assessment, the support that the assessment designer must provide to users, how they ensure that, what's their ongoing reliability study. When you have an assessment, you have to make sure, particularly when it's not ABCDE, right? It's a performance assessment.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make sure that you calibrate your evaluators. And so you have to have a plan of how do you evaluate? How do you make sure it stays, reliable and valid and all those kind of things.
Chair, may I have a follow-up? Yeah, okay, I will take the liberty. Have you talked to in-state? Because I know that in-state professors are those that are doing. Because I know that there's concern for national standards, right? So, are there groups developing in-state?
The concern is always the resources around it, but we have talked to in-state universities, and I think there are some that may pursue development of such a tool themselves. They'll have to meet the same standards as anybody else,
right?
But as long as they do, then that's fine. That's perfectly fine.
Yes. I just wanted to follow up on the standards. The piece that Travis didn't talk about is what would the content be, and the content would be that it has to be based on the Utah Effective Teaching Standards. So when you're thinking about national, we'd be like, no, even if it's a national, pretty good assessment, but it doesn't follow the Utah Effective Teaching Standards, it would not. So that alignment would be worth more points than anything else.
Gotcha. Okay. I have more questions coming to my head. Thanks. May I have one? So, will that hinder incoming from out of state, or it shouldn't?
No, because the out-of-state rules say that if you have something similar in your other state that's a little, that kind of meets that state's requirements, then that can meet the requirement. Or if you have 4 or more years of successful teaching, then that requirement has been met. Okay. So if you're coming from another
length
state,
of time.
Exactly.
Okay.
Board Member Warner.
I'm wondering because the task force hasn't met since last August or September, And these, I think you guys have done a great job. They have they have done a phenomenal job working with us. And so I'm wondering if it would help if before we go any further, we meet one, because are we under a timeline crunch right now? We delay 1 month?
Only for 502.
Only if you want 502 to go into, maybe do that first.
Right.
But
And then-
501 certainly doesn't.
So-
plenty of time to discuss.
So 501 we
I
have.
would disagree with that comment.
Oh.
That it's not a rush in the next few months, but I really don't want to press it into next year.
Sure.
Right. No, I'm thinking like,
right,
okay.
Agreed.
Like,
And so my question is similar: is do we need a task force, or can we have a couple of conversations in this committee where we can really look at this rule line by line and say, does this meet what we've been looking at? So,
I think that's can I make a motion that we as a committee meet together, or without reassembling the task force, but meet together where we have a couple of hours to go through this?
To just do this rule, right?
Is that your motion?
Is that
Well, yeah,
the
this is
motion?
my motion. Yes.
Okay. So the motion before us is for the Law and Licensing Committee to meet together and discuss this further.
So I guess as part of that motion, the question would be, would it be an official, task force meeting, open to the public, where you get compensated, or would it be more formal where we get together with staff? Because our standing committees technically don't have to be, they're not subject to open and public meetings. So if it's just, let's get the members of this group together to kind of ask questions with staff over an hour or two, so that when you come back to this meeting and invite the public, that then you can go through it quicker. I guess I'm just trying to clarify so that we can make the proposal board leadership about whether it's a compensated and whether it's an open and public meeting, or if it's more informal discussion.
Yeah, I would say it's at the discretion of the executive.
Yeah.
Remember.
So my thought process on it is that, this committee only meets once a month, right? And if we want to really dig in and look at, okay, what's the possibility of this change, or what's the impact of this line, et cetera, then would that take us 6 months to get through this rule? And if we were to meet as a committee, once possibly, and just really spend a couple hours on this rule, would we be able to expedite the timeline so that it doesn't take us 6 months, with a half an hour here and a half an hour there discussing this rule?
I say expedite it, but as far as compensation and everything else, it would have to be up to the executive, I think.
So if we had the motion that it would be just a meeting with informal
with no decisions that are made.
No, yeah.
Could I just clarify the motion? Is the motion only about 501?
One, or about this rule?
It does need all
502, I think we need to do
502 we have
because
to
we need to pass it.
I just wanted to be
501.
Yeah, it's 501. Yeah.
Just 501. So the motion is to meet together as a committee informally to discuss R277-501 educator licensing. Yes, Board Member Belknap?
I'd like to amend that we can discuss 502 even though we may pass it out, that we don't alleviate that. Also, too, that if there's other people we feel like we need at the table, that we invite them to join us.
Okay.
As an informal meeting, I don't think you really have to set the agenda or really specify.
Okay, thank you, Ben.
Make a motion to set a meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, then I take just the first one back and put 502.
Okay. So yes.
Okay, sorry.
The amendment is to add 502
to the discussion.
Any discussion?
But now that we're not going to do something with it today.
Any discussion with the amendment? Okay, so now we're going to vote on the amendment. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and then now we'll vote on the full motion.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so back to 502. We have some people from the public that are wishing to speak on this, so I'm going to go ahead and take public comment. We have Tracy.
So I'm just curious, this is a question. So
State your name
how
and where
does-
you're from.
Tracy Watson from the Utah Education Association. How does the current legislation affect, that hasn't passed yet, how does that affect these rules?
Yes.
The current legislation would, if it does not pass, really we can't do 501, if that makes sense. So if the current legislation does not pass, 501 it will kind of need to be off the table. If the legislation does pass, we could actually do keep 502 forever and add, change names. We could, superficially, you could kind of use our current system and just change names and you'd be in compliance. But I don't know if that helps what I'm trying to say. It removes a lot of the titles of like level 1, level 2, letters of authorization, certain titles that right now we need to have removed. But that doesn't mean we couldn't then keep those, but also add the LEA-specific associate and professional, because right now the language says including at least those 3. But if the board wanted to, they could actually expand that. So,
And just because it's legislation, right? Like, two questions. One is, if it passes in part, but not the way we anticipated, what do we do? And so, should this committee or the board pass these rules before the legislation passes?
well, and I don't think that would happen, first of all. Even if they were to pass it today, it wouldn't even pass on second or third read until after the session. But based on the motion today, I don't even think they're going to take action on 501.
No.
There's going to be some continued discussion.
And I don't think that the legislation would have no impact on 502.
Right.
Thank you, Tracy. We have Christy Jones. You can sit here.
Well, we've heard some really interesting things this morning that I wasn't really prepared for, so I just want to thank everybody for this open process where you're seeking our feedback over and over and respecting it. But I hadn't heard that until this morning that the pedagogical assessment would need to be tied to Utah's effective teaching standards directly. I thought it would be maybe, I'm only aware of one that is, none of the nationally available ones are. So that's exciting for us. And then, Travis, you mentioned that, let me just, for the people in the room who might not be aware, for all of the schools of education across the state, we are working and have been for quite a while on bringing a state-created assessment system, including performance assessment, to levels of validity and reliability that are hoped to eventually be able to meet the standards that the board might set. So that leads to my next question is, how, Travis, I heard you say that the hope is that schools of education would have time to develop tools that would meet the standards. Do you have any idea what that amount of time would look like?
So, Madam Chair, would you like me to answer? I'll answer.
Yes.
Okay. Basically, the full implementation gets pushed back to January 1, 2020, which means full implementation in the 2020-21 school year.
2021.
Right. And the standards are getting pushed back for, instead of July 1st, to this coming January 1st, so January 1st, 2019. So you would have at least a full year in order that you would know the standards for certain, because we would start working on the standards immediately. But, you'd have at least a full year, a year and a half technically, to work to meet those standards before they went into effect.
Okay, so we would have a year to know what the standards are, see what's all out there, see what works best for each institution.
A year and a half, yes. So you'd have from January 1, 2019 to the July 1, 2020, essentially.
Okay, great, thanks. And then I just had one other comment. Do I have a limit? I just like another minute or 2 minutes? 1 minute? Something that we've been looking at a little more closely recently because of new information that we've been finding, and I don't know if this has been entered into the discussion or not, and if it has, just tell me and I'll be quiet. But looking at USBE high-stakes test data, if the tests tell us something accurate, it's that there is a widespread in scores among students in particular demographic groups, and everybody in this room is aware of that. So then combining that with recent demographic data from Kemsey Gardner Policy Institute, University of Utah, it appears that the demographic groups demonstrating the most struggle based on today's Utah test scores are the same demographic groups projected to increase most rapidly in the future. Did that make sense? Okay. So given those statistics and trends, I should have said, I don't think I said, did I say who I was? I'm Christy Jones, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself. But I do teach in a school of education that is informing my comments. So given those statistics and trends, we just see this as an opportune time to make sure that every teacher in every classroom is prepared to meet those increasing demands, and not an opportune time to do anything that reduces what it takes to be fully prepared on day one of taking over a classroom to meet those demands. And given the critical time in simultaneously addressing the teacher shortage, what I would hope is that the licensing structure will shorten its current time limits on associate and LEA-specific licenses, and that it will more explicitly limit the circumstances under which these licenses are issued and the percentage of teachers per school holding licenses that have led to possibly underprepared teachers being in classrooms. And I hope that these license holders will be required to rigorously develop their skills, their Utah effective teaching standards, while they assume the leadership positions in Utah classrooms.
Thank you. Okay, and then we have, is it Marilee Cole?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to say. I just, you want to come to the table? Yeah, I'll come to the table. I'm also a teacher educator. I've been in the field of education for about 30 years, and so I really appreciated, again, the work and being able to give feedback with those questions. And so my concerns are very similar to Christy's, and I think the committee is working in a way to address those, which I'm really pleased about, and that the standards will be based on the 10 effective teaching standards. At our institution, we're working on those. We align a lot of our courses and the assessments that we already do to those 10 effective teaching standards, and so to be able to develop a pedagogical assessment would put us in line with what we're already working on and make it better. So based on the demographics of English learners and children with special needs and people who are the demographics of students of color in our schools, we need to increase that in our schools of education to prepare the needs for those. And so we want to make sure that that's there. And so we're trying to do more of that. And I think if we have that as part of the 10 effective teaching standards, and that's the standards that are based on that assessment, I think that will improve teaching across the board. So we're really excited about the prospects. So thank you for having an open meeting.
Thank you. Okay, do board members have any other questions for staff?
Are we talking about 502?
Yes. Regarding 502 or anything else that was discussed. I do have one question for you, Travis, on the pedagogical assessment. So it's going to be, we're going to come up with standards for teachers, right? Well, we have the 10...
sorry. Let me rephrase that. Standards for the assessment.
Standards for the
standards
assessment.
that the assessment must meet in order to...
And then those standards for the assessment would align to
exactly. They
our
would
10
say
effective
your
teaching
assessment
standards.
must align to the Utah Effective Teaching Standards in order to meet the standards for the assessment. Yes.
Okay. I just wanted...
Lots of standards and pieces. And, I get it.
Okay, board member comments.
And I'm guessing those standards wouldn't just be like the effective teaching standards reviewed, it would set standards for reliability.
Yes.
And so those
Correct.
standards would
be a
not
part
just
of
be
it.
what the
Right.
content of it, but the how
Yes.
it could be scored, how it would be given, et cetera. That, if I understand.
Okay. Any other?
Yes, we didn't sign up, so I just want to know if I could make a quick comment.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Joel had to leave to go to the Finance Committee. Carolyn Lassiter, USDB. Just a real couple of comments. The Deaf Ed license, I think, is on the list with all of the other, like 502. We didn't see it on there, so we wanted to be sure that that was included. And second of all, for the LEA-specific license, we do have some comments on that.
We'll take care
We'll
of it.
take care of that. Okay, thank you. That was a lot of hard work that went into
Yeah,
that, right?
absolutely.
But the LEA-specific license as well, we do have some input on that. I don't know if the committee, if they meet separately and they're going to invite, more voices into that, we'd love to have part of that. Specifically, we do have situations, especially in a field as ours, deaf and blind educators, really hard to find educators. We do have a situation right now. We have an individual teacher, high-performing teacher, had 3 years of evaluations. She is English as her second language, has tried to pass the praxis 3 times. Comes close every time, but yet her performance evaluations are incredible, and that involves parent surveys, observations, performance in the classroom, and also student achievement. And yet, so those type of situations come up, and to be restricted within a special ed teacher cannot get an LEA-specific license for a variety of reasons with every component in place is worrisome. So I would love a case-by-case basis, but yet maybe that isn't a possibility, but it's something that, I don't know, warrants more discussion. So I'd like to have that. And that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Board Member Belknap.
Thanks, Chair. On that same topic, I mean, there's other ways around LEA licenses with the concerns of everybody not trusting everybody. Maybe numbers of LEA specific inside of a certain LEA, not limiting the years. So there's a lot of different things that could be done other than that.
Well, and can I make one comment?
Yes.
Laura? I don't want to interrupt you. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, one of the things it does do right now is that for any LEA specific, the state board has to renew it. So like the local board does the first one for 1, 2, or 3 years. But then if they want to renew it, so they want to do it long term, then the state board wants to look at it. So instead of what we wrote there now, what you could do is just say, well, when we look at it as a board, we'll just, if we see special ed, we better have a good reason. I mean, that would be up to you. So you could handle it that way and just remove that special ed language. It's not a problem.
Board Member Belknap.
Thank you. So I just want to get clarity on a statement you just made. So right now, a district can give an LEA-specific license for 3 years, but if they really want more, they can come to the state and say, I want longer?
So as 501, so again, we're talking about the new system.
No, I'm talking about right now.
So right now, they can get an LEA-specific, which is very different than an LEA-specific right now.
Right, I'm talking about right today.
Okay, so an LEA-specific license, they have to meet specific requirements. They get it for 3 years, and then they have to renew it like any other license.
Okay, thank you.
And that's with 502?
That's current.
No, it's right this minute
That's
today.
right.
I just wanted to get clarity of something he said.
Okay.
It's a little
And then
no,
if there's concerns on that or what have you, that's what we would address with 501.
Right.
Okay. Just trying to separate the two rules. Okay. Any other? Go ahead and get Daryl. Okay, so I'm seeking for a motion.
Sorry, just one quick question.
Yes.
So we were talking about timing of the standards and the development of the test in 501.2. These should be totally different numbers.
Line 112.
And so it gives the superintendent until January of next year to develop the standards. So I'm just curious why that timeline was built. And so the pedagogical exam wouldn't go into effect until 2020-21 school year.
Mhm.
So 19. That's like almost a year and a half later. Is that right?
Yes.
Is that? Do you feel that that's completely necessary to go back quite that far? Is there any way to get it into the 1920?
So that was the original wording of the rule. One of the major concerns is the infrastructure, the cactus system, the integrated systems, the issues that would arise to do it that quickly. Because essentially, if we want to implement this for the 1920 school year, then if the legislature gives us money to rewrite cactus, we have 6 months to do it. We have July 1 to January 1 because we have to warm up into we have to get things ready going into the 1920 school year. So the cost of redesigning a 17-year-old system in 6 months is significant, but the cost for a year and a half is less. It really is about some of the cost and impact. And the other aspect is to give time for anyone who wants to design an assessment that isn't a national one, so that they can do their research. Because it takes time to build up validity and reliability research. It really does. But that's the best answer I can give you.
Also, if I may, when you think about students being ready for that assessment, once the assessment is selected, the programs need to have time enough to really make sure that their candidates are ready to pass that assessment through multiple courses. That's not something that you can just turn a switch on and do. The programs may have to make adjustments as well. They should be in pretty good alignment because they're already all focused on the educator effectiveness standards, but sometimes there's slight variations in vocabulary, or students aren't used to videotaping themselves if that becomes one of the components in writing about that, or so it gives the programs a while to actually prepare students so that they can be successful when they take it. So there's really 3 reasons.
Board Member Belknap.
Okay, well, 2 and 3 I can almost swallow, but number 1 I cannot. Okay, we ran in base in this office for how many years and switched over a little at a time. No, it wasn't pretty and it wasn't perfect, but we could also change titles in Cactus and make it work. And then if we're gonna preclude great teachers or new teachers coming into our schools, which harms our children because of a system, we've got a problem at this table.
I just, I totally get, because I'm not a tech person. I don't run these systems, but I think this might be a better conversation to have with Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones and Jared Felt, because these two don't actually run the systems.
I wasn't really talking to them.
I know,
I was just really stating out that I think we need to think about that.
We may want to. There was some. Believe me. When we had the fiscal note for this HB 46 as staff, and I'm talking about like 15 to 20 members of staff, talked about, is this really an issue? Do we really need to have Cactus rewritten before we can do this? And legitimately, and I would ask that you talk to Scott Jones and Sid Dixon, because there are some real technological problems with our system, and they're actually worried that the Cactus system could implode at any point. The language is so old.
Today
exactly. So I mean, it's kind of chicken and egg. What's the problem? I think the Cactus system is a problem no matter what. It needs to be revised. Even if we weren't revamping our system, it's at a critical point. But I guess I'm just trying to say I really don't think it's an excuse. There's some legitimate technological concerns that I am not the best advocate or expresser of, because that's not my thing.
It's okay.
But others will.
We don't speak IT. It's all right.
I know, yes. So,
Board Member Warner.
Are you talking about the rollout date? I'm sorry, I'm in a phone call with Representative Snow. We're playing telephone tag. But
yes.
Are you talking about the rollout date? We had talked about that, about having the rollout day with expired licenses, those with expired licenses coming back in, and reciprocity moving quicker and taking a little bit more time, because we've taken time on this task force along the whole way to make sure it's done right. And so that's why I was a little worried about trying to get it all rolled out by the time the legislation passes and we get rules passed, that gives them like a year to get everything done, and that can, I don't want to have it fail. And so that's why I at least had talked to Travis and said, I think that maybe we should hold off a little bit on at least the revamping, only because we've taken our time, and I think we've done a pretty good job including our stakeholders, parents, education associations, higher ed, all the other team players that have been at this entire process for a year and a half, and I don't want to screw it up at the end. Sorry.
No. I actually really appreciate that, and I understand the time frame. But I also say, you know, we're pushing this. Here we are in February, and we already have the those God things, already in place with our teacher effectiveness in information. I don't foresee it being really a painful exercise in aligning standards to what teachers are already required to have.
Can I respond? So you're talking about the timeline for the standards for the assessment?
Yes, and it's got it here, January 1st, 2019.
Honestly, I wrote that as no later than, anticipating we would do it immediately, and as soon as we were done. But I put that as the deadline. If you prefer that deadline to be July 1st, we could probably still make it. I bet we could.
But then that could push everything faster.
Yes.
And that's my question: is the standards development really pushing out, or is it an independent factor in this?
The standards establishment, it would not be a reason to push it back. It's maybe part of the reason, but more of the reason is the system shock, the IT issues, the funding issues from the legislature. That's more of the reason. The standards are not the key factor at all.
Yes. And just so you know, Laura, or Board Member Belknap, I was one of the people.
Miss Stalin.
I was one of the people in house that had the exact same reaction that you did.
I know.
Did I not, Travis? I was like. Anyway, so there was a lot of discussion, and I think it would be very helpful because it took me time hearing and a lot of staff understanding why really the technology is a problem. Because I had the same reaction you did.
I heard the same thing over and over with BASE. We can't do it. We can't do it. We can't do it. But we ran parallel systems. So maybe it's not Cactus we use, and you could run parallel systems and not slow the train down.
Well, that is, I think, what the idea is to have the two systems.
Sorry, Chair. I'll be quiet for a minute.
The other, my understanding was that the year-and-a-half timeline wasn't only just for Cactus, but was it not also to allow those universities
they could have
to
it by
create
July.
Their own pedagogical
Let's
They could have a
just say
standard by July.
university feedback would say that if the standard are established July 1st, 2020-21 or 2019-2020 is too fast because of the bureaucratic, quite frankly, the bureaucratic structures of a university and the difficulty in changing programs. It takes time. There's timelines that they have to follow by board regents rules. That's part of the issue.
And if we're giving them the control to create, then we should also give them the ability to have the timeline needed to be able to do that. So, but that also will be discussed with 501,
Yes,
right?
that is 501.
Okay.
So whatever you decide when you have
just making sure that whatever we decide here is not going to mess that up. Okay.
Unless you'd like to change the date in 502 for the standards, and I honestly don't have a problem with that if you feel better that way.
I'm fine with the date as it is. Okay, so I'm looking for a motion.
I'll make a motion that we move this out 502 and that we convene as a committee in the next couple of weeks. No, we already decided. Okay. That we move it out.
Angie, the last section of this, the rule effective dates, do we want to strike that until they've passed 501 or done something?
Oh, that's true. Maybe to make sure that.
And then the one other thing would be to add the deaf education license area to lines 48, between 48 and 49.
Oh, yes, we need to add
Just deaf education.
Just deaf education, yeah.
deaf education license.
So do you want me to describe why we're deleting? So, can I make
Yeah.
So I think that what Ben is saying, and I think this is wise, is we can bring 502 back again when we pass out 501. But for now, to put the superseding language in, because until we actually have a 501 pass, you wouldn't want 502 to disappear.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay.
So can I make an amendment to?
Hold on.
Or do I
So
need
the
a
motion
separate
before us
motion?
right now is to pass R277-502 educator licensing revisions with the amendment
to delete
lines 349 to 351 and add
the deaf education
license
after what line 50?
Between 48 and 49.
Between 48 and 49. Do we have any discussion to the motion? Could you?
No, go with it.
Okay. So, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Me.
Can I ask one clarification? And that you like, you all recommend we do this on second and third reading, or recommend that the board do it on second and third reading, correct? So that it can take effect in May, otherwise it would not take effect.
Final.
Second and final reading. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah.
Yes, I used to be the one who was, okay.
So
We'll
Are
do
there any
that.
objections to that?
Yeah.
May I ask a question, Angie? This is probably for you. So we wouldn't be able to start working on the standards until the full board adopted. Would we have to wait till May? Because the rule won't be effective until May. Like, when could we start that? And the board member Belknap is anxious for us to get going.
You could, I think you could start, assuming that nobody's going to object to it.
Nobody.
I mean, but we could have a public hearing.
Objected to that.
Do you have any feedback? Have you received feedback that people don't want the standards and that they're going to ask for?
Well, there's feedback that there's some people that don't want a
They
pedagogical
don't want
performance
this
assessment.
Right.
Why?
But the feedback
That's a
about
whole
having
conversation.
standards, there are people who were opposed to the pedagogical assessment who, when we started speaking in terms of standards, that swayed them. They said, yes, as long as we're looking at standards and there can be multiple ways of achieving this, then that's good. So then I guess my question is, because I wouldn't want to do anything the board wouldn't want us to, I mean, we could start working on these. We work on things all the time. If that's not going to violate what the board's intent would be, and then we could have them
I
ready
think
to
that
go.
makes sense.
Yeah.
And it just lets us be ready, and then
Yeah.
if it doesn't pass, then we'll just.
Because that would be one piece that we could start working on right away.
Yeah, I mean, I think the board's actions are about when those standards are effective or have.
Right.
It doesn't preclude staff from working on what those would look like if they become. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Before you guys go to the substitute teacher rules,
Are we going to talk about 501 at all today?
Probably
I
not.
got
Should we
it.
wait?
Do you want to wait now? And board member Belknap, I know if you have an opportunity, Drew Camps has just undergone, so you guys all know Drew, she's our intern.
Yeah.
She's actually going through a transition right now with the UVU education program and could actually give you some, because she's actually expressed a lot of angst about they changed a certain portion of their program and she's the very first class to do something and how really that does impact students when you don't give enough time for the transition to take place. It actually impacts the students in the programs if they try to do it too fast, and she could give you that perspective. It's really interesting.
Well, if I may, anything too fast is really, really bad. I mean, we witnessed that with the Common Core standards being initiated in 2009, 2010. it just pulls the rung out from everybody because there's no support, there's no professional development, there's no curriculum, there's no testing, there's no, right? So, but here you are to teach it, and if you don't, then you're, so not a good idea.
I'm okay. If you want to discuss anything.
I don't know if it would help to just point out a few things now so that we're prepared for that work as we get into it. Because I was just hoping to expedite, not postpone a conversation. And so if we could talk about just some questions I had on 501.
So Travis, we're going to talk about 501 for a minute.
Oh, okay.
Just some questions so that we can be prepared for that meeting.
Oh, you're going to tell me questions you want me to answer in the meeting?
Yes.
Got it.
Or just even if you can answer them now,
Okay.
we don't have to talk about it later. So can I just go through some of my questions? Okay. So line 39 is career and technical education, or CTE. And I'm just curious why this is a licensed area of concentration and not a content area.
So, I actually struggled with that because, so, let's see if I can explain this. So currently they're separate license areas. And the current distinction between the two is in order to get a secondary license area, you must have a bachelor's degree. There's no other way to do it. A CTE license area may not have a bachelor's degree in some of our skilled and technical areas for CTE. So when we designed this rule, we were thinking, well, maybe we should just collapse that because they teach in secondary, right? But at the same time, it convolutes some of the requirements, and again, that key of having a bachelor's degree or not having a bachelor's degree, and that's why we chose ultimately to leave it separate. But there is an argument to be made to put it together.
Okay.
There is.
So I can understand the importance of separating it, but what if you have a secondary teacher who wants to teach a CTE course? Do they have to get that area of concentration, or can they get an endorsement?
They just need the endorsement.
Okay. And is that clear somewhere?
In 520, we will make it clear.
Okay. Can I?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, line
You'd like that for me.
70 to 72.
Okay.
Okay, it says 70 to 72.
Thank you.
And sorry, I always get lost as I try and follow rules. But so to approve a license, so up on 62.3, it says to approve a license recommendation, an educator preparation program shall. So, and then 70 says include requirements if the program offers content endorsement preparation that are at a minimum equivalent to competency requirements of the endorsement as established in the superintendent. I'm just curious, what type of a program doesn't offer content endorsement preparation?
Elementary. Because there's no endorsement in elementary, it's just a license area.
So an elementary program does not have to require competency?
Well, we don't have specific competency requirements for elementary like we do, say, for science versus history versus math. That was the intent there. And currently the rule says coursework, because that's kind of the current model, and what we're trying to do is shift all that language to competencies so that they are competencies that the people need, and it's independent of coursework.
Okay. But then when we talk about somebody coming as an associate, we talk about competencies of elementary education. And so why are there not competencies for an education prep program for an elementary school teacher, but there are competencies for an associate educator to pass in order to get an elementary license? So if you, sorry, I get lost in this very easily.
Well, it is
License
a complex
structure.
rule.
So, associate educator license requirements.
What line are you
I don't know yet. Sorry. Let's see. So the content knowledge requirements of an associate educator license on 202 include, for an elementary license area, passage of an elementary content knowledge test.
Which would apply to both programs and non-program. Because those people coming through a program, Their student teaching license will be their associate license.
So I guess my question is the assumption is that there is content in an elementary program.
Yes.
And we have set competencies for that elementary program. So why doesn't the program, why aren't they required to say we have competencies for our program?
I'm going to write this one down. If that is okay with you.
Sorry.
And I'm going to
If
have
that's
to look
one you
into
need
this.
to come back to.
Yeah, I will.
For that.
So
I see what you're saying.
That's a great
I see what
question.
you're saying, and I think there's a way to do it, but let me do some research.
Okay, thank you. Lines 81 to 83. See, include a pedagogical performance assessment meeting standards established by the superintendent, blah, 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 in all license areas in which an assessment is available. So we've talked about pedagogical performance assessments, meeting the standards that we're going to do. I'm curious, what license area would this assessment not be available?
School psychologist, school social worker, speech language pathologist, any support service license area is likely not. If we want to do a performance assessment in those areas, we're going to have to create one. And if that's what we want to do, that's what we can do. And like a school counselor actually doesn't have a performance assessment either. So it'd be things like that.
So where have we established the existence or the requirement for that performance assessment? So when we say it's available, it just exists, so therefore we use it, or is it in a rule somewhere?
In the rule, it says somewhere that the board, or the superintendent, or I don't remember, 177, where it says the superintendent shall review, adopt, and establish passing standards for all assessments required for educator licensing. So ultimately, it's the superintendent's responsibility to adopt things. So the superintendent would work with stakeholders and say, is there an assessment? Do we want an assessment? Those kind of things. But ultimately, it would be the superintendent's responsibility under that provision to determine which ones have the performance and which don't.
So it's not in the rule that would establish who has a performance assessment and who doesn't?
That is correct. If you wanted that in the rule, it's certainly something that you could change. I mean, this just directs it to the superintendent, but you could do it specifically.
Because I guess my question is it could be arbitrary as the future goes on, where the superintendent is like, we won't do that assessment anymore, or we want it to be on here. And so it'd be interesting to consider whether or not that would be valuable in the rule.
And all things, and I'm often reminded of this, any actions taken by the superintendent are subject to board review. So if that were to happen and the board said, why are you being capricious, or why are you doing it this way, they could roll it back and force the issue essentially.
So I'm sorry, can I? And I don't want to engender feelings of not trust or whatever. But if there is a decision to be made, and we're assuming that the board would have a say over that in the future, why not have it as something in the rule that says here are the areas that we see? But if there's a compelling reason not to have it in the rule because there is desired flexibility, I'd be curious to hear what that would be.
And it's really, let's just say I modeled this as much under current, procedures and practices as, for example, so the content knowledge tests we use, the board does not specifically adopt them or their passing scores. There was a process established back in 2003 for that always happened. And I've kind of managed that ever since. But the question is, does the board want to manage passing scores for tests that change every 7 years that may need to be modified? And if the board does, that's great. But they haven't in the past, that's why it's written this way. If they want to, then we can rewrite it that way. Absolutely.
Just one quick follow-up is just the public uses rules as a place to come for understanding, right? Maybe not.
Well, that's a good
but if it's not in rule, then as a public person, if I'm trying to seek licensing in Utah and I want to know what it is, the requirements that if I'm a school psychologist and I want to know what do I need to do to become licensed in the state of Utah, then it's making sure that we have as much information for those who are seeking licensure in our rules so that it doesn't become, well, who do I contact and well, the decision right now is that, yeah, you should take this test, but it was different 5 years ago for my friend who came to the state of Utah. And so those are the things that I think belong in rule, where it guides public's ability to access the system. And so that's all I'm saying as far as that goes.
Board Member Lisa, comments?
I would highly agree with Board Member Cummins because we're dealing with mental health and more a stricter profession than I would say having someone who knows architecture and coming in. I would give more leeway to those who understand their profession as teaching, and then as opposed to not having standards or a performance assessment for those who have a doctorate degree or a psychology degree. I think those need to be under a much more critical assessment than a profession outside of the medical realm. Does that make sense? Just because we're dealing with...
I'm thinking what might be beneficial is for the upcoming meeting, if I gave you a detailed description of how tests are currently adopted in passing scores as standard, and then you can decide, okay, is that something that we as a board want to take over? And so be it, hey, great. And if not, then we'll continue to do it.
Great. Okay.
Thank you.
Can I just say something? I just had an idea that maybe you could have a separate, so maybe you want to put the types of licenses that have the pedagogical assessments in there. But the other thing you could do with the types of assessments and the passing scores and all that, maybe we could have it in a separate document that we incorporate in by rule.
Like
the
special ed rules.
Yes, that then, or like the assessment testing administration there's like a guidance document that's 20 to 30 pages. Because then you could list the tests, the passing scores, and then anytime you updated those passing scores or those assessments updated, you could update the document, and then the board would review it as part of, incorporate it by reference. That might be another way to do it. Yeah. And there'd be a link right in the rule that says, here is where you go, and you can see the tests and the passing scores required for each area. That's just maybe a compromise so that you don't have like this 30 or 40 page rule where we're putting passing scores and descriptions, but put it in a separate document, incorporate it by reference. Good thing about that.
And then,
sorry, I just have a question, Tracy Watson. One of the things that I come up against with like school psychologists and communication specialists, they're considered licensed educators, and so because they're licensed educators, they have to be evaluated annually. And many LEAs use the teacher evaluation. And then the psychologist or the communication specialist says, I've been evaluated using the wrong tool. Mm-hmm. But that's the only tool that there is. So I don't know if this is addressed in rule or...
Yes. I don't believe it is, but it did come up in our discussion yesterday as we were talking about the statute and that idea of looking at creating a licensed category that's different than a licensed educator for some of these specialists that work, so that they can receive the funding for being licensed, but creating a special category. And so that's, I think, a conversation that we're beginning.
Yeah,
so.
And licensing, not just for funding, but also for protection of students.
Yes.
Like if there's misconduct, that you could pull that license away.
That they're in the cactus system.
And maybe that's part of the solution, is having a category of licenses where they don't have to be evaluated through the evaluation system, or they're evaluated,
I don't know
but not according to that tool or something.
Standards, I think right now the current rule just requires that they evaluate them, and some districts have chosen to evaluate them using a questionable tool for that purpose.
Okay. Yeah, because it's problematic, and the only thing is with the separate category, right, is I don't know the pushback we would get from like someone who is, I'm just using the example, like a school psychologist who was once considered a licensed educator and now no longer is considered a licensed educator.
As we worked, USBE, educator coordinator for educator effectiveness, as we worked on that tool, the model tool that the majority, 36 of the districts are using, we discussed many times about having a separate license for different positions, different things. What we have is an overwhelming concern by principals to have to learn all of these tools in order to do the evaluations. So I don't know if there are industry-specific things available. I don't know, but it's worrisome for the principals to have to keep everyone because they do have to go through quite a bit of training.
Okay.
Something to consider.
Okay. Anything else?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry. This is why I move committees all the time, so I can always have the newbie excuse. Sorry, I'm new. I have lots of stupid questions.
It's getting old.
Okay, line 117 and 18 is, it talks about detailed requirements, and this is once again referring to requirements of a program to submit. And I appreciate it in most of the rule it talks more about competencies, whereas this one once again goes back to course lists and course information and course
I
descriptions.
think I actually changed that in 502. Maybe I just forgot to change it in this one.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's an oversight.
Okay, great.
So thank you for pointing that out.
185 to 189. Okay. This is just an overarching concern that I know has been expressed and just wanted to open up the conversation. But when we first talked about this associate educator license, it was that idea that it was a temporary space, and 3 years just seems a little bit too long for me. But I know that's a conversation we can have going forward. But
If you'd like, I could try to collect some data on like how many level 1 licenses get extended, or I could try to see if we could find something to help inform that discussion.
Okay, that'd be great. And then line 345 to 47.
Okay.
Where it talks about creating that mentor situation for an LEA required to create a mentoring situation for their associate and then their new teachers. My concern with how this is written is that it says where possible, and I know it's where possible, but that makes it sound like it's the what we want people to go towards. A mentor shall hold a professional educator license, perform substantially the same duties as the educator, which I think is a good movement. 'Cause, you don't want to have the PE teacher mentoring the science teacher. However, my question is does this push districts who are trying to go to a true coaching model where they hire a full-time coach that is going into schools and trying to they are experts at coaching, not just the next door teacher? And would that model, anyways, we don't know the effectiveness of which model is actually better, and we're trying to pin it towards something where it's the next door neighbor is my coach and mentor rather than a more extended program.
The superintendent's expressed a similar concern.
Okay.
So let me see if I can come up with some better language that would encompass that, because that clearly eliminating that was not our intent.
Okay. It's in law.
A lot of that language is in the law, but we'll change that too.
Okay. Sounds great. That
We'll
concludes
try.
all my questions. Sorry. Thank you.
Are you done?
I'm done.
Wow. Okay, well, I won't have any more from this.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, no.
So we'll move on. Thank you, Travis and Diana. Oh, I guess Diana left. So. Thank you, Travis.
I had to say for the next one, I think I was told.
Actually, let's see, 2.3, R277-508, substitute teacher. So, Ben?
Yeah, this is our substitute teacher rule. This is up for continuation. It's been a 5-year sunset is coming up in March, I believe. So we need to get this amended and continued. The updates to this have been stylistic. I don't think we've made really any substantive changes here, but we're just asking you to adopt this as amended and continue it.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions regarding this rule? Yes, Board Member Belknap.
Thanks, Ben. On 38 through 41, I know that this has been the practice, longer than 8 weeks. Are we handcuffing some rural districts here who can't find
So we got asked the same question in USSA yesterday. If you look at 42 through 44, the superintendent, meaning I think Travis, can grant an exception.
I guess I should have written that down.
They have discretion to give them a little flexibility.
Okay, and is that our superintendent?
That would be the state superintendent.
No,
Okay.
and she probably delegated that to you. Or
It would be, they contact me.
I would say still, are we making them jump through a hoop here?
No, because, can I speak?
Yes.
When I say the hoop, I don't mind them asking, but
They don't ask.
okay.
It just happens, and we don't. It's not something we police, quite frankly. It's something we train people on. We teach them about it. We show them the rule, but ultimately, we're also well aware that many LEAs have substitutes longer than 8 weeks.
So would we mitigate their risk by not having that? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I understand.
Yes and no.
I know that we're in a conundrum here,
Right.
because we really want great, well-educated teachers with our children. But in some cases, they can't get one. They have a substitute
Right.
who's doing a fine job.
I think the grant exceptions provision mitigates that risk. So if a parent was to come or sue or to,
But what if they don't come and get that exception?
that's a good question.
And something happens in that classroom with that long-term sub, and they were supposed to do that. Now we've just put them at risk, everybody, because this was the rule and they didn't follow it.
Well, you have put them at risk. They've put themselves at risk if they have.
Well, I know they have. I don't know.
Many of them, what they'll do is they'll either have long-term or they'll rotate them every 4 weeks.
Yeah, well, and that was my concern, is you put that in there, and it's more disruptive to a classroom to rotate a teacher than it is to maintain a long-term sub over time. And so you just disrupt the whole flow of a classroom to follow a rule. And so my question is how difficult is that hoop? Like, why don't they call?
Because we don't ask them to. We don't. There's no provision by which we enforce this rule, because we don't track substitutes, because there is no state substitute license. So we don't. It's one of those things that we don't enforce.
Board Member Moore.
That was my
Valid
question. Why do we have this rule if we don't track it?
My question too.
If you'd like us to track it, we can certainly invest
Why
resources to do
would
that.
we not take it out?
Yeah.
Or amend it to not.
I think the key parts of the rule would be to require the LEA to have a policy regarding substitute teachers and their qualifications, but maybe the rest of it doesn't need to be there.
I'd like to make a motion, Chair.
Okay.
That we, I'm not sure exactly what I'm making
Wait,
yet.
we take public comment for 3 minutes?
Oh, yeah, we better should do that.
Yes.
Because if I finish my motion, we can, I know.
Yes, thank you, Tracy. We'll hear from Tracy.
Yeah, so I had the exact same questions that you all did. Before we move to get rid of the rule, I'd like you to consider Travis's concept to require the LEA to have a policy. Okay, because I do support that there should be a licensed educator in every class, right?
Yeah.
And I appreciate Board Member Cummings about the rotating. It seems unnecessary to require teachers to rotate, and that is just disruptive to kids. And I appreciate Board Member Belknap's, are we handcuffing the... So we want a licensed educator in every room. So there should be a policy, right? And maybe some type of oversight before you let this rule. But I think if you have a rule that isn't possible to follow, we need to consider that.
They should
Or it is
have a
possible
provision.
to
They
follow.
have them policy for hires.
Tracy,
Thank
you want to
you.
state where you're from?
UVA, sorry, Utah Education Association.
Madam Chair, can I ask Ben a question?
Yes.
Ben, what would be the timeline implications if we were to bring this back next month?
It would last.
It would last.
Yeah, because it needs to be passed on final reading next month.
So we amend it.
Is there could we amend it then?
Yeah.
I mean, I would.
You can pass it and bring it
Just
back.
strike those lines.
What I'm hearing is if you struck 34 through 44, you already have in section
65.
4, you have a priority for giving substitute positions to licensed educators.
Right.
On 65,
And then
you're requiring them to have a policy for substitutes. So it sounds like if you deleted 34 through 44,
So Ben, Chair, is that okay if I ask clarify? So Ben, your first comment was their first priority should be to.
so if you look on line 46,
Okay, I just want to have.
an LEA shall
clarity.
give first priority to hiring
Oh.
substitute teachers to those who hold a valid license in the subject matter. Then they have a second priority to persons who have a valid license in any field. Third priority to hiring substitute teachers that have a college degree.
So if we were to strike 38 to 44,
I think you'd probably just strike 34 through
34
44.
through
34,
That section.
okay.
Well, and 31 is
section.
the definition,
Yeah, so we would, yeah.
So if we were to strike that, then
not to exceed 8 weeks.
We would
The
still
definition,
be-
so, is not to exceed 3 weeks.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
Wait,
five.
where is
No,
that?
10.
No, that's not in the definition.
No,
Oh, means a.
I
That's 35.
thought I saw on line 31.
33 through 44 is what you
So
said.
33, yeah.
I think if you struck
So
33
temporarily
through 44,
absent.
that would be what you're
Okay.
trying to accomplish. Member Belknap.
So, did you want to have comment, or do you want? Can I make a motion and make comment, or
Yeah,
what would
did you have something to say?
Okay.
Board Member Brittany Cummings?
So line 33, temporary absence, that definition, is that used in any other rules? So if we struck that, is that a problem? Because it's referring to the teacher that's absent, it's not in reference to the substitute. So would that line still be necessary for anything else?
That's only for this
No.
rule.
It's only for this rule.
And it's only in the preceding definition in 31 for
Okay.
substitute teacher. And you would just strike who is temporarily absent, and then 33 to 44.
Okay.
Or
I don't think you even need to.
don't
I don't think you need to
leave
change
there.
31. You just wouldn't have that.
You just want to have that 8-week
That 8-week
tag
requirement.
on the definition, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Just the assumption that the teacher's coming back.
Yeah.
And that we're not using a substitute to fill
Exactly.
a permanent place. So, okay.
Andy?
I apologize because I know I stepped out for a minute. As I'm looking at line 33 right now, I just don't like it because it seems like that the 35 through 37 is the appropriate place to say it may not exceed a certain time period if you're going to do it that way. But then the one thing I wanted to let you know is to not feel pressured by the continuation. You could just make a motion to continue the rule, and you could still continue to discuss the amendments. At next month and bring the amendments back if you're feeling pressured, like, oh, these are big policy changes.
I don't know if I would like to continue it with that in there, but.
Yeah, so I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion that we continue this rule with taking out lines 33 through 44. And I just have to make sure. At what line Ben says that the LEAs have to create policy?
66.
66. Okay, I just had to see it.
66 or 82.
Okay, and move this to the full board on, you don't have to do a reading. Second and final.
Okay, so the motion before us is to pass R277-532, no,
508.
sorry, -508, substitute teacher amendment, continuation, taking out lines 33 through 44, and send it to the full board for second and final reading.
For consideration.
Yep. Any discussion to the motion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously.
That was really fun.
Okay, item 2.4, thank you, Travis. R277-532, evaluation of non-licensed employees. Boy, we just have all licensing stuff. Okay, Ben?
So this is another rule that's up for continuation in March. We have a statute that requires the board to have rulemaking on Evaluation for non-licensed public education employees. I've done the usual stylistic updates here, moved things around a touch, and that's what you have before you.
Any questions for Ben from board members? Yes, board member Brittany.
I move that we approve R277532 for draft 1 to the full board and forward it to the full board on first reading and move it to the full board for second and final reading.
Okay, so the motion before us is to pass R277-532 draft 1 on first reading and move it to the full board for second and final reading. Any discussion to the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. Okay, item 2.5, R277-751, Special Education Extended School Year. Ben.
So this is the final rule we have up for continuation in March. I've gone through here and done stylistic updates. Assistant Superintendent Voorhees also asked me to make a few small changes. You can see those throughout the rule sheets here, I think, if you have any questions about this particular rule, and this is up for continuation.
Okay, any questions from board members? Okay. Yes, board member Belknap.
Leah, I'm not exactly sure what you're saying on lines 52 through 54.
Yes, if you'd like to come out of this room.
Quotation mark there.
There we go. Okay, so IDEA actually outlines Assistant Superintendent Leah Voorhees. So IDEA outlines that extended school year is available to a student for that student's provision of FAPE to receive a free appropriate public education. And the reason that a student would need extended school year services in order to receive a FAPE is if the student was moving along, making progress, and all of a sudden hit a major really started learning, and was at a point where if the education stopped for a certain period of time, like summer, for instance, that the student would then regress.
Oh, got it.
So recoup means that when the student comes back, how long is it going to take the student to get back where the student was previously? So that's the analysis that the team has to make. All students regress during summer break.
Every student.
Yes, exactly. Every student regresses, but the team has to determine, does it take the student with a disability longer to recoup than a general education student?
The word recoup.
Yes, that's all it is.
Thank you, Leah.
Okay, any other questions?
I'd like to make a motion.
Yes.
Thank you. That we approve our draft 1 of our 277-751 and send it to the board for consideration on second and final reading.
Okay, so the motion before us is to approve R277-751 draft 1 and send it to the board for second and final reading. Any discussion to the motion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. R277-609 standards for LEA discipline plans and emergency safety interventions.
Yes, thank
Wasn't
you.
Ben this time.
I know, it wasn't Ben,
Oh, it
actually.
was.
Well, go ahead, take it, Ben. You can talk about what the other changes. A portion Ben did and a portion I did. So the one portion I worked with, and we've got a lot of our staff here over on this side who worked with me on the update to the rule. And so Corby, Carol, Lillian, Leah, if any of you
they may have things that they could add to the discussion, or you may want to call on them for questions. But essentially, the reason this rule is coming before you, there's two main reasons. One is to update some of the language based on Representative Snow's HB 239 from last year on juvenile justice. So I'll give you kind of an example of what's changed. So we eliminated all the references to habitual truant, and if you look on lines 181, for example, through 184, or disruptive student behavior, and we changed it to clarify students who are a Class B misdemeanor or above, because due to the change in HB 239, students who commit a Class C misdemeanor infraction or truancy issue, they cannot be referred. So we kind of had to go through and clarify which students could be referred, which students couldn't.
What do they do with the?
Okay, wait.
I'll write it down. I'll ask you in a minute.
Do you want me to hurry and finish just describing the technical changes? Sorry. And then also including the new requirements on lines 197 through 203, which are essentially required in statute, but explicitly requiring them to be part of the school's discipline plan. Because the statute requires them to refer students to these type of interventions, but we're wanting to make sure they include it in their plan. The other big thing that this bill does, rule does at the top of 11 is it explicitly requires LEAs to do daily submissions starting with the next school year on their discipline data. We've had a very hard time, for those of you like Board Member Cummins and Board Member Warner who were on this committee in 2015, you'll remember that we actually started asking for this discipline data back in 2015, and we still have not received it, or we're not getting it in a quality manner. And so we are now trying our best efforts to get that data daily in order for it to be higher quality. So,
Angie, can I just say something there? The requirement for the, sorry, Carol Anderson.
No, you just need to ask Chair if you can talk about it.
Sorry.
Yes,
Can I come on up?
It's okay. She'll let you. I'm just.
Carolyn, the requirement for that we put in 215 was for the accounting of the emergency safety interventions.
Oh, okay.
So that was just a little clarification. So that was 2015.
Okay, any questions, Board Member Warner?
I'm wondering if we should hold off on this because it looks like we're going to have some, there's some changes supposedly coming to 239. Are we under a time crunch on this rule?
Yes.
I would say yes, because of the data collection. And the reason is Aaron Bruff has a conference in April, there he is right there, with all of our data users. And if we want them to start submitting this on a daily basis, this rule needs to take effect before they have their data conference in April. But we can bring the rule right back and change it due to, and we could bring it back even as early as March or April to do the other part. But for the data submission portion, that part is very important to get going right away. Is that correct, Carol? Yes.
Should we only include that language then and take the other changes out until we're done with making revisions with HB 132? That's the revision of 239.
Yes. If I understand House Bill 132, is this legislative session. It won't change a lot of the requirements that we already have in here. What they're trying to do is put some of the teeth back into some of the JJ's reform, because what we're hearing from the field is when they're developing these multi-agency plans to address the status offenses or those lower level misdemeanors, they're having a hard time getting students or parents to comply with those plans. So they're that will be the changes that 132 will look at, is going back and saying, yes, you have to be in compliance of these plans or these alternative interventions. And so I think that's the major changes. So I think the language that we've put in here won't affect it a lot.
Okay.
I think the biggest change, because still you're going to, require documentation, this would all be appropriate, but then we would add something that says, or for the Class C, that the student, I'm looking at this, thinking of the substitute right now and assuming that it passes. We'd almost add new language. This would actually still be fine. The new language would say, or if it's a Class C misdemeanor truancy, that they failed or refused to engage in and all. So I actually don't know that a lot of what we're putting in here is going to be rolled back. It will be more will be needed because.
Well, I just know it. Yeah, that's talking about A's and B's, and I know C's and truancies. That's where we're looking at making the changes.
Yes,
but I haven't.
But do you see where this would probably still actually stay the same, and then we would have to add something that says, and then for C's, you'd have to provide documentation that the student refused to engage in an intervention.
Right, and that's the one thing that I am struggling with, and we've discussed this, is defining refused. Does that mean they refuse, or does that mean they've not been non-compliant?
And I think that will all depend on what the statute, how that's either they'll address it there or we'll have to address it. But I guess
so.
Yeah.
Wait, can I ask? Brian, well, you've been part of that discussion. In the proposed legislation that talks about refuses, can we define that in state board rule or?
Yes.
Okay. Well, then that's great.
Unless
they don't define it, right?
Unless the legislature does. So you may have somebody.
I may not want him to define it.
Well, I agree. I would say let us do it because that's going to be a very nuanced. You're right.
Okay. Well, then we'll.
Let us do it. Yes.
So that will answer Laura's question that she had originally.
Right.
Huh.
And you have control for that.
That I was still.
Okay, well then I'm going to vote that we support this. Can I make a motion?
Yes.
Oh
wait. Do we have any public?
No, not for this one.
It's because I wanted to find that fuses.
At one point, and part of the reason why Brian is here, and it's not necessarily something that we can fix today, so you could pass out the rule, but one question people wondered is whether we want to talk about some truancy issues while we're talking about this rule, and whether we want to ask either Representative Snow or somebody else to. Representative Jefferson Moss has a bill open on truancy. Well, it's on.
Right.
Anyway, related. Whether there's some questions about whether the statutory definitions of truancy should be amended this session because they're a little outdated. And so it's not something we would address in the rule, but I just wanted to bring to the committee's attention that there have been some who've wanted also us to have a discussion about truancy as we're discussing this rule.
Because I would be really happy to say something about this, and that is, at least the areas that I represent have been a little vocal against some of the things, and I understand why. I mean, we had a pretty good meeting about it, and that is that they've worked really, really hard to get graduation rates up, to get dropout rates down. It's well above, Cash, for example, is well above the state graduation rate and well below the dropout rate. And so when we take truancy off the table, we have a problem in that we can stand on our heads and do everything we want, but if the kid doesn't come to school, the kid doesn't come to school. And what do we do with that? So I'm supportive of moving forward and having a discussion about what is truancy. It's not, I mean, when a parent sends their kid to school and they think their child is going to school and the child has disappeared and gone somewhere else, there's a difference between truancy
and an excused absence.
Right. And I think we do need to define that.
I agree.
So, and we have a problem in that we're not referring it, and it's the school's responsibility, which is great, but for some kids, it doesn't seem to be working very well. So.
Any other discussion? Board member come.
My typical ticky-tacky stupid question, sorry. Line 197, is there a piece of a letter missing, whether you're an S or an A, so a plan for
For a
referral
student.
for a student or
Mhm.
students. Okay.
Yeah, for a student. That's
And
good.
then just in general, this rule uses the word harassment, and we just took the word
does
out. So
Where
line
at?
57, 60, and 139 were the ones that I found.
Oh,
Thank you.
Her new job's going to be rule writing.
Do you want to come work with us? We'd love it. Yes, so 57. Sorry, can you tell me the third one?
57, 60,
Uh-huh.
and 139 were the three that I saw.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Because we'll have to put that in the amendment, right?
Yes. I can help.
That's all.
Anyone else? Okay, I am seeking a motion. Oh, yes.
Can I just ask a question? Do we have data on kids that are truant versus data on kids that are chronically truant? Because the definition refers to both categories of truancy.
Are you talking about habitual truancy?
I'm sorry, habitual truancy, yes. Do we have those
I don't know that
data?
answer. Aaron and Carol would know.
I think it would, we should get that data.
Yeah, sure.
We should get that.
Can we get that? Can we get that data?
Eventually.
What would eventually mean? What does that mean?
Good definition.
Okay, so we need to.
Sorry, Glenn, you speak to.
Yes, please.
Aaron Bruff, Data and Statistics. We're going to need a good definition, and we're going to need basically the mechanisms to put in place so the LEAs then start submitting it through the UTREX, so that daily submission process. So that's what it takes. Now, the long time frame that we usually like to say is 18 months for a complete start to end finish. We're happy with the date. But just to give the LEAs that time to get all of the STS systems updated, get the UTREX system updated, get our warehouse updated, collect and have all that information in place.
Okay.
So,
Chair, if I may then, can I make a motion that we go ahead and put it to someone, whether it be to the AG's office to start writing, or to Angie to start writing a rule or a definition for truancy, habitual truancy, and what was the other one?
Just those two.
Just between the two, and then start a process to start collecting that data. Yeah.
Okay. So the motion before us is to have.
Before, do you remember the rule number, Brian, that we have right now? I'm trying to, was it 70 something? Do you remember we have a truancy rule?
Yeah, we do.
Do you have it? Oh, here it is, 607.
Oh, 607.
Okay, so part of it would be to bring 607 back to this committee, and Brian and I and others would be happy to
So
work.
my motion is, can we bring to this committee Rule R277607 so that we can look at and possibly include definitions for truancy and habitual truancy, and then put forth a request for LEAs to start gathering that data and submitting it to the state.
Okay. So the motion before us is to bring R277-607 to law and licensing for the purpose of defining truancy and habitual truancy, to begin a collection of,
And to I'd say survey LEAs on their
and
definitions.
to survey LEA
right?
on.
Well,
Or are you asking for that data?
for the data.
Okay.
Oh.
For the data.
Okay.
So I think
Yes.
it's, yeah.
To begin the process to collect the data.
Yeah. And to, yeah.
Discussion on the motion, and Brian, yes.
Let's see, I think Lisa has the right idea. We need to clean up the definition. There is a discrepancy between our rule definition and the statute definition.
Right.
Once we have that unified, then I think
Then
Aaron
we
can
can-
collect good, accurate, solid data. Otherwise, right now, there's confusion between whether 5 days is truant
Right.
versus 10 days is truant.
I agree.
So I'd like to amend the motion that we start working here on what the definition is, because there's, and the reason for the change, may I speak to that? The reason for the change is there's someone will do truancy different than someone else. What's it called? Habitual.
Habitual
That,
truancy.
so any data we get is inaccurate.
Yeah.
It's,
Right.
it's meaningless. And then the other thing I would like to ask is this type of data already collected, or are we adding additional data to collect?
That will be the question, I think.
So, can I speak?
Yes.
So the answer is, I'm going to go with the assumption most LEAs have some form of this information already within their system. We just don't have a uniform definition behind
Right.
what it is.
Okay.
Some might not have anything, I just don't know. That's what the data conferences and the monthly meetings are for, is to find out what's out there and how to adjust it.
So to reiterate, my amendment would be for it to come back so we can work on a consistent definition of those two terms.
Okay, so the amendment is to bring back R277-607 for the purpose of defining truancy and habitual truancy. Is that
Yeah, I would actually not handcuff us on that. Bring this
Okay.
back to make definitions.
Okay, to bring back R277-607 for the purpose of making definitions. Discussion to that motion? Board member Brittany Cummings?
If this goes to not handcuffing ourselves to discussion, because I'm just curious, we talk about truancy and habitual truancy, how does that tie in with just data we already collect with attendance, right? And how those things are related, because we already collect data for attendance in order to calculate, funding streams, et cetera. And so how are all those meeting together, and how is truancy different than our current attendance requirements? So, anyway.
Okay. Yes.
And I just to clarify, likely we won't be ready for this conversation in March. If that's okay, it would likely be in April or May. Okay.
That's
You
fine.
don't have any spare time.
Okay. So we're voting on the amendment. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so now, the motion now is, oh my goodness, to bring back R277-607 for the purpose of defining, making definitions. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
Is that good? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So now, back to R277-609. What would we like? And do I have a motion for R277-609?
Amend it first.
Yeah, well, wouldn't that be in the motion? That's true. So, yes.
Did we make the motion on member Cummins? Is that what your second one was? Just
That
about-
was, Laura
Amended
Board
the
member
first
Belknap
motion.
amended the first
We
motion.
passed, and then the second one you passed as well.
So the second one was just to bring Rule
bring it back.
607 back
Just
stuff.
to make definitions.
Yes, just for definitions. So that was
Just
the
to bring
amendment.
back
The whole rule. And
Just to bring back the whole rule, and we'll do definitions.
But the intent is to make sure we have uniform definitions
So
on
then
those
we
truancy.
motion on her second part where she said request LEAs to collect the data. Is that-
No, that was.
No, that's removed.
Thank you.
No, thank you for clarifying. Okay, so anybody else have any? Yes.
I'm just going to make a motion.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I move that we approve R277-609 Draft 1 with the amendments removing harassment. And I won't put the A in the amendment. That's on first reading and forward with a favorable recommendation for the full board to approve on second and final reading.
Okay, so the motion before us is to approve R277-609 with the removal of harassment. Do I need to list the line numbers? On lines 57, 60, and 139.
Yeah, anywhere.
Anywhere in the rule.
And that's good, because it was a non-substantive change.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I move it to the board on second and final reading. Any discussion to the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. Okay. So now,
Turn that time over to me on that one.
yeah, I'm going to turn the time over to Angie for R277-484 data standards.
So the reason this rule was initially on the agenda is because we weren't sure at the time that we established the agenda whether, in order to collect the data in 609, whether we'd also need to amend 484. And just in the last week, we've determined that we do not need to amend 484, so we don't have anything for you to amend today, and you could just move on to the next item.
Okay. Next. So the next item is R277-613, but this passed out of the board.
Mm-hmm. So we had this on the agenda just in case the motion yesterday was for the committee to continue the discussion. Then we didn't want to have to wait till March. So because the board passed revision 7 yesterday,
Right.
there's, unless another board member wants to, staff does not have anything prepared that you need to discuss on that rule
Do
today.
any board members have anything to discuss on this rule? Okay. So then for that,
Tracy?
Tracy, did you have anything else to
No, that was
add?
I had that question.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
7 passed out yesterday, and so I'm like, really, we were really I just was like confused, that's all.
Okay. Okay, item 2.9, board policy 1002, rulemaking procedures.
All right, thank you. I will. So, a couple months ago, I had some board members, especially board leadership, asking me about timing of posting certain revisions to rules and amendments to rules to board docs, as well as identifying board members' names when they ask for an amendment or a new rule revision. And this is kind of a new practice because of the way we now have structured our meeting times, where the committee meeting is not just the night before anymore. We have the committee meeting and then we have a month in between, and during that month board members will look at rules that were passed out of committee and then want either amendments to be made to the rules or a different revision, like revision 7 is a good example, where something passed. And so the question was, should we revise our rulemaking procedures to kind of more explicitly require names on those rule revisions, on amendments, and then number one, if it's going to be a large amendment, 10 or 11 words or more, should we require or set the expectation that board members work with staff in advance, and or talk about the timing of uploading those or presenting those amendments and revisions. So I just started something. You do not have to take what is here, but the idea was to have the conversation started here. The couple of concerns I have heard people say, but then I've heard concerns on both sides, is that if it is a larger amendment, they would prefer staff to clean it up in advance so that it's not so difficult to follow the amendments once it comes to the full board. And so that's why I did the 10 words and the 11 words, and that's also what the legislature does. If you're going to make a motion for an amendment in committee or on the floor, they require you to have staff prepare it if it's 11 words or more, but you can just do it verbally if it's less. We don't have to do that if it's an option. And then the other question is the time, putting a board member's name on it or not. And this also helps with staff time and determining what priorities are. If, let's say, 609, now today this wasn't the case, but let's say staff worked on 609, and then let's say board member Warner had some very distinct feelings about 609 and wanted it to go in a different direction. Would I present what staff prepared and then identify separately what board member Warner wanted as a revision 2 or draft 2, for example? The other last thing I wanted to clarify is currently this rule, because you may get a little confused about the difference between what we've got currently in this board member may sponsor a new or amended rule to be presented. that there's a difference between asking for an agenda item and a new rule to be brought to a committee or the board for the first time versus if there's something already on the agenda and you want an amendment or a draft prepared. And so that's what I was trying to differentiate, and so maybe to think about those two processes differently. The one process currently, you'd have to get another board member to say, yes, I would like to talk about 607, for example. In this case, the committee did it, so you don't need another board member. But let's say that Board Member Cummins, after this meeting, said, I think it would have been a good idea if we would have brought 607 back. She could then reach out to the other board member, Cummins, and ask that 607 be placed on the agenda to talk about truancy, and then we would start that discussion. But really, I'm trying to focus on how do you all engage staff or present motions. Not so much in committee. Committee's a little less problematic, but it's once it gets to the full board, and whether you want to make sure that something's drafted up by staff or reviewed by staff beforehand so that it makes the process quicker or not. So hopefully that's good background, and I'm just open to any suggestions.
Okay. Yes, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
I think it does create a lot of efficiency to the system. I would say that I know you have in parentheses should, shall, down in
Which
number
one?
8.
Yeah.
And I think it should say should, because I know that this process is beneficial even to the person who's bringing forward the motion, that getting that help and having it well articulated, it goes so much smoother, and people are more likely to support your revision if they're not like, what did you just say? Wait a second, And so I think it should be a should, but I don't think it should be a shall, because there are instances where things need to be changed at the last minute, and you need to have that flexibility to be like, whoa,
Right.
this amendment needs to take place, and we can go through the messy work of doing that in board meeting. And so I don't think we should exclude it entirely, but I think going the other route, if you know what needs to happen beforehand, please do it ahead of time. So I would say putting should would be my preference.
Hold on one second. Board Member Belknap.
Are we, in this case, are we making it a problem for our staff? Because if Board Member C and then Board Member C come and they want two different things for you to help them, and it's different amendments. So how would you deal with that? They want literally two different.
So it would be revision, right? Would it be a draft?
It'll
one?
put their name
Oh,
on
you'd
it,
have to have
will it
the
not?
L. Would
Yes.
just be last name.
Draft
It
2
says on here last
would be
name.
L. Cummins.
Yeah. Sorry.
You're right. And
Like how Board Member Warner's amendment was done.
So the staff. So what I'm asking. So the staff would sit down with both of these, let them both make their amendments.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
And okay. And then I have one more.
Yes.
Will the numbers be alleviated when and if in that glory day that we can have everything written up there and see them as they happen? Will this be a necessary piece at that point?
Well, do you mean like draft 1, draft 2, draft 3?
No,
what numbers?
When someone makes an amendment, it's typed up, and there it is.
That would
And
be
then
a
somebody
voice to
amends
text
it.
message.
Oh, like we do it in real time?
No, so in board meeting, we can see it up there, that here's the amendment, here's the amendment
it'd be
to
in
the
real
amendment. This is, because
Oh.
that it's just, are we ever going to have that? I thought that was part of our new
I would love to have something
cost
like that.
piece, was to be able to have that. Okay, don't worry about it, we'll talk about it another day.
Until they revise the voice to text apps that are still problematic.
Okay.
I was just going to mention, Board Member Belknap, that I oftentimes, when I used to work at the legislature, would be working on substitutes simultaneously that did almost the exact opposite thing.
Okay.
And so I am very comfortable drafting 2 amendments or 2 rules that completely contradict each other, and I would be very keep the confidence of either if that's what's asked for. If B. Cummins doesn't want L. Cummins to know what's going on, I'm very careful, and I have done that in the past.
Or it could be the other, you know,
or vice
if
versa.
anyone else working on this, could we work together?
And
Okay, all right.
and I will try to, based on what's going on, if people are wanting to do the same thing, I will often say, there's another board member that's interested in the same thing. Would you like me to tell them you're working on this, or vice versa? So I'm completely comfortable
And then
with
as far as placing those amendments on board docs, would that also be left up to the board member that, because if we are already discussing that rule in board meeting, if like board member Warner's amendment to draft 7 to the bullying rule wasn't placed on board docs ahead of time, if the board member wanted it placed ahead of time just for the board to read, they could decide that or not. Yes.
The only problem with putting it on board docs too soon is there hasn't been a motion made, right? So in order to amend something, there has to be a motion made. So if something's coming from committee, and here's our committee recommendation, and the committee recommends to do revision 1, blah, blah, blah. If we did go that route where a board member could request something would be on board docs, we would have to be super clear that this is for your information, that there's a motion coming. So it does get us into a dangerous place where all of a sudden that motion hasn't been made, and that, obviously it can create confusion as to what is actually coming forward to the board for their consideration at the beginning of that meeting. So
I just wanted to clarify that.
what I could do in practice, and we're just starting, this is all new because I'm open to any kind of feedback. But what I could do in practice is if board member Warner is ready for the full board to look at revision 7, which will now be draft 7. That one's only revision 7 because it was prior to 2018. But let's say that she was comfortable with the full board seeing draft 7. I could actually send that out the night before or a couple days in an email. And that way, because what I've heard is people out in the field, one time this is what we've learned when we did a Rule 700. We prepared a draft of 700 that was going to be an amendment that a board member was going to make that was different than what the committee did, and people out in the field got very confused about, and that's also because it didn't have a name attached to it. So we're trying to make the system better by attaching a name, and then the other piece of feedback was let's wait until closer to the time the motion's made so that the field doesn't get confused about what was passed by the committee. So if you'd like, and I don't know that we need to put this in the rulemaking, but I will just start offering that to board members if they'd like me to send it out, or they can even send it out to the full board, the night before or early in the morning or whenever they've got it ready. You like that?
So just leave it up to
board members to
I like that.
do that.
Okay, any other board member discussion? Okay, and
I didn't sign up, but it's kind of tied on to the last one, the 619 one, and this one for you guys to consider, because when the revision isn't really substantive or controversial, 7 went out yesterday, but there was no public comment, right? And board policy, that's up to you guys. If there's a committee recommendation and then it's amended at the full board meeting, but then if it is controversial, you're sort of leaving it open, you're sort of creating public hearing.
Well,
right?
Board member.
And so could a motion, if there's a fairly substantial revision that does end up passing, it can be passed on second reading at that board meeting, which we give it that month, and have it added to the consent calendar, which could be, I don't know if we want to even add that to the policy, that if it's a substantial freedom, it could or should, or the best place for it. I mean, because we can't force it. Obviously, the board can take, whoever's making the motion would have the right to do whatever they want, but it's that opportunity to say we're going to pass this on second reading, and then it could go on the consent calendar depending on the timing.
Does that need to be in the rule, or is it something again?
I guess it's just making sure that board members are aware of that opportunity.
That they know that they have that opportunity.
That when they make that motion, it doesn't have to be on second and final reading.
And
Okay, do you want to include it explicitly, something written right now, or?
I would do it as well because it also gives the public assurance that it's being vetted and not just absolute.
I'd like to consider.
Yeah, it's being considered.
Maybe somewhere around where you have after 11 words to consider that it be brought back in the next, however you would word that, Angie.
It could even be of a 10 that board members may consider having the rule pass on second reading.
But see, any change could be longer than 11 and really wasn't substantive. It
could be very
substantive.
Right, it could be.
It could be big,
so I wouldn't
or it could be
limit
middle.
it to 10 or 11 words. I would just...
Maybe just letting board members know that anytime a revision's made at board meeting, there's some way that they know that it doesn't, just because the committee recommends, so the committee recommends version 1, or whatever we're calling them, recommends version 1, and so it comes as a motion to the full board to pass on second final reading. So that's part of the committee motion most of the time.
Right.
I mean, we even as a committee don't have to make the motion in that way. We could pass it and recommend to the board to pass it on second reading. And so just letting board members know that whatever revisions are made, they have the option to make that motion in a way that says, I want to pass this revision on second reading. Or even on, I mean, do we
Even
have
on
the
first
ability?
reading?
Could you say that you want to pass it on first reading even? That if it's big enough, it's different. Because the rule, it's tied to the rule as a revision. So, okay, anyways, but you pass it on second reading and then it could come back on the consent or even to the full board depending on where we want it to be.
Board member Belknap?
I'm just wondering if this could be part of your report and not necessarily put into policy and have it be clarity, and you might have to say, okay, this is important, pay attention. And then, 8 of us will. And then, I mean, I don't know that I want to slam that into policy yet until we think about that for a minute.
Okay. Yes.
So what I'm drafting right now, this is what I've written. If a board member's amendment or draft described in subsection 6 is reviewed for the first time and adopted by the full board, the board should determine whether it is appropriate for the rule to be adopted on second reading only or on second and third reading or second and final reading. I don't know, but I mean, it's not really binding, but it could be sending a message. And I think that's
the board
what
may
you're trying.
consider, because
And maybe
that's letting us know that.
Do you like something like that? Do you want me to send it? Or what do you think?
I like that, the way you're conceptualizing it.
So the other thing I could put in order to just kind of explain why we're saying it. No, but I could put to allow or to potentially allow additional comment or additional opportunity for the public to weigh in if a board member's, if you wanted. So this is what I've got now. If a board member's amendment or draft described in subsection 6 is reviewed and adopted for the first time, that's a better way to say it, reviewed and adopted for the first time by the full board, the board should determine whether it is appropriate for the rule to be adopted on second reading only or second and final reading.
Yeah.
You like that? And I just want to say anything about public comment for now. What do you think?
That'd be good.
We can include that.
When you say the board shall determine, how do you visualize that determination taking place?
It would be part of the discussion. Okay. So the board member, I think,
the board member, like the board member could say,
yes, that I'm
on second reading.
Yeah, or you could say that. So let's say board member Warner, it's a small thing, and we'd say, well, we all feel like this is appropriate for second and final reading, and for many reasons it's timely, whatever. Or you could say, well, we're going to do it on second and final reading because we already know there's going to be a public hearing, so let's just get it going and do the public hearing. Or,
thank you very much.
I mean, because sometimes things are big enough that it doesn't make sense to wait for 2 or 3 people when 50 people are going to want to weigh in on it, right? There's a lot of different considerations, and this just essentially triggers to the amendment maker that you're going to need to address whether this should be
a second reading only or a second and final.
Because
Final.
sometimes you know there's going to be a public hearing.
Yes.
And then
So
sometimes you know
should
there
we
doesn't
leave
have
it-
to be one.
Right.
So would this be left to the amendment maker
Yeah,
and not
instead
the
of the
board?
Well,
I mean, the board would have ultimately decided.
They decide
though.
anyway.
yeah. Well, and I guess it's the board because the motion will be made.
Yes.
Right. The motion maker will make the motion, and it'll have whatever
second
it will
reading
be. And so I think it is important to say, me as a board member who didn't make this motion, I need to consider
Yes, that's what I was
this,
trying
and
to
so
say.
I can amend the motion, and so that it would be considered through the whole board through an amendment to. No, I think we should whatever. So, anyways, if I see that process correctly.
Remember
Okay,
Belknap?
but help me. If we send something out of committee, okay? So and now somebody amends our piece. They don't usually say on second or third or final
Right.
reading. They just make the amendment.
Correct. So they would make the amendment.
So they need to be. I think they probably need to be conscious of that. But we as a board decide. So how will we do that?
So I think Angie's verbiage is correct. So the motion comes out of committee. Sorry to take so long. I just have to visualize it. Otherwise, we get there and we're like, what do we do? So the motion comes out of committee, and normally it's going to say on second and final reading, right? And so Terrell brings a revision, and the amendment basically just replaces the word revision 6 to revision 7, right? So that's the amendment that Terrell made, and so the motion still is on second and final reading. And so then the board, somebody would have to take the initiative to consider and to make an amendment to say, I would like to amend the motion to
Unless
say
the amender
on
changed
second.
it.
Right.
And so the amender could,
So
make
Terrell
that
could make
amendment,
that.
Could have done that
or
along with
another
it.
board member could make a
Right.
second.
All right. So will you read that again, Angie?
Yes. Okay. So now that you've got the
I'm
vision,
pretending to see her.
you've got the vision now. So this is what the language says, and it'll be a new subsection 10. If a board, or maybe, yes, if a board member's amendment, and actually maybe it'll be 9, sorry, and then 9 will be 10. If a board member's amendment or draft described in subsection 6 is reviewed and adopted for the first time by the full board, comma, the board should determine whether it is appropriate for the rule to be adopted on second reading only or second and final reading. And I could actually project that up there, I just realized, if you want me to, but
No.
did you feel good about that?
I'm talking when we have 20 of them. Just goes around.
Well, this would have to be approved. Whatever change we make here would have to be approved. So, like, within the month, if we think, we messed up, we could then amend that.
and
we could put it to practice.
Yes. And one thing, board policies are only adopted. Like, we don't do readings.
Right.
So you would say we recommend it be adopted, and then the board adopts it. So for this one, we don't need to worry about a second or third or final, or because it's not a rule. Speaking.
And they can't have a public hearing.
That's right.
Really? Let's put some more things in
Or be
here.
sued.
Or be sued.
Thank goodness.
Well, you could internally, but
I know. So do I need to make a motion that we approve this with the changes Angie's
With the amendment.
proposing with the amendments
So is that your motion?
on the 100th reading and finally? Just kidding. Don't put that in there.
Okay, so the motion before us is for Board Policy 1002 be approved with the amendment.
The new subsection 9.
The new
else?
subsection 9. Or 10?
This 10 was 9.
Okay. So the new subsection 9. Any discussion to the motion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passed unanimously.
I forgot, and I'm also sticking with should instead of shall, right?
Oh,
Yes,
I
yes,
forgot
with that too.
Should. For
That's my.
yeah.
do I need to
Okay, yes.
amend that? Or
And I think we got it.
With the minutes.
As long as the board passes
with the, okay.
out this.
Yeah, we did
can-
say amendments.
Is Brian speaking to this?
Okay.
Okay, and then 2.10, the medical examiner data agreement. Do you want to explain?
Yeah, we also put this agenda item on just in case there was something that came up that you may want to discuss because of the session. But I don't think staff, we have any anything planned to be discussed on this. I think that what the board decided yesterday was to wait until after the session
To see
what
what-
happens and then determine whether they're going to approve that data sharing agreement. Right?
Yes.
So, and I think that's a smart thing. I have struggled with this one a lot. And so I'd like to see, I'm not sure who's running anything or what, but
I don't either.
I mean, I've heard through the grapevine there's something, but I know I talked to Representative Elison, and it's not him. But I struggle because I'm trying to figure out on the unattended death. I think it would probably just be easiest to fix that legislation as to what is given to the medical examiner's office in an unattended death.
Right.
That probably would be the easiest way. Just so you're clear, there are not parental rights on that. If there's an unattended death, the ME's office gets stuff. But I think under the circumstances, I've reached out to several families, that I've worked with on suicides and asked, when would you want this done? Really struggled. The several families that I've reached out to said, I would have not been very thrilled if you had brought that up, those first couple of weeks. So I don't know what the process is with the ME and when they meet with the families.
Right.
But I think that I haven't heard of anything, but of any legislation. If there's not legislation that comes out, then I would like to make a motion that we put this on the March agenda to at least have a discussion about it, because this is like one of the hardest things that people go through. And when's an appropriate time? And how do we balance parental rights? How do we make sure that we're having a serious discussion about the problems that we're seeing in this state with teen suicide? And so I would like to make sure that it's on there and it's not forgotten.
Thank you.
So I guess that'd be my motion, that we put it on the March agenda if it's not brought forward.
So the motion before us is to put the
Data
Office
sharing.
of the Medical Examiner data sharing agreement on the agenda in March or April?
Yeah.
After the legislative.
Law and license or board?
Some
Law and
licensing.
licensing. Sorry, to bring
Because
it
was
back to
remanded
law and
back to us.
licensing.
To bring it
For-
back.
It was
to look
remanded
at-
back to staff.
Is that what
Referred.
Referred.
I love
Oh,
that.
remanded? Okay, sorry.
There's your world.
Okay, so to refer this back to law and licensing after.
Referred back to us.
Referred back to us after the legislative session. Okay, any discussion to the motion? I just have one, I struggled with this a lot too, and I just wanted to say that with the data that's collected by the medical examiner, it's collected for the purpose to find out what actually happened. What they're wanting is for research.
Right.
So it goes further and beyond what actually happened. And it's that research portion that I've struggled with. And I know that I see the need for it, but I also know that if a parent did not want this research done on their child, they should have a right or an ability to say, I don't want that done.
Right.
So that's very different from looking at what happened versus now it's for research. And that's where I am making the difference here. So I just wanted to add that. But okay. So any other discussion to that? Yes, board member.
The motion restated just says after the legislative session, or the motion that was made was March. And so I just maybe you'd say March or April.
Yeah, I said March, just because we have meetings like the following week. Don't we?
Yes.
Probably could bring it up in March.
Yes. Yes, we do.
We do?
We do?
Yeah, we
Because
do, the
I got
next
a new
week.
calendar.
Because
we have it like
remember,
the 15th
we
and
didn't
16th.
meet again during the session because it's so
Thank
painful.
goodness.
Yes.
Oh, so we do meet.
Yeah.
March 15th
The
and
15th.
16th.
Okay,
So we
could.
could have it on the 16th. I could be even really
I was
formal.
thinking like after would be in April because I forgot that we had moved that. Okay.
16th you could put.
When is it
So-
a board meeting?
March 15th and 16th.
March 15th and 16th. Okay, so bring it back to the
Because
March
I got a new
16th
calendar.
board meeting.
Because I lost my other one.
Yeah.
That I just got.
Okay, so the motion before us is to bring back the data sharing agreement to law and licensing in the March 15th and 16th.
And there's no time constraints.
Okay. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I guess, Laura, are you opposed?
Yes. Oh, no, ma'am.
I am opposed, but only because I just don't. But I'm not opposed to bringing it back in for discussion.
Right.
There was something else I was going to say, but I forgot. It fell out of my
Chair, I
head.
propose we adjourn.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Hi. Oh, wait.